Okay, are you ready to go? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call this regular council meeting of December 7th, 2021 to order. I'm going to ask for adoption of the agenda. Someone make that motion for me, please. Councillor Charlotte, second by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting November 23rd. Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Councillor Elliott.
Actually, Your Honor, just on the agenda, one of the things I've asked in the past is about a committee report or something to be included as on our recurring agenda. Is that amendment to the procedures, or how do I get that on their regular?
So, Mr. Thackeray, any comment?
Let me take it offline.
Oh, it's just I'm trying to get the recommendations or comments from the various committees, just as like their moment, give them their moment in the sun. In a council meeting, and that's all I've been trying to do. I've been trying for a long time to, we're talking committee review in the future, but this is just a simple step. Just say, listen, you've got something to say, we'll listen to it, and it's public knowledge. Yeah. Offline, okay. All
right. Let's move on. All right, so 5A, we have a public hearing, and so Mr. Simon, you have, or Ms. Hartling, you have a brief presentation, is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, I do.
Hey, Ms. Hartling, before you start, Councillor Brooks Hill has a statement.
So I would like to recuse myself from this, as my parents own property across the street directly from this development.
All right, thank you, Councillor, appreciate that. All right, Ms. Hartling, you can carry on, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just bring my screen up for you here. And just before I start, I just want to make sure that you can see the presentation up on your screen before you.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the application you have before you at this public hearing is for an OCP and rezoning amendment. This is to facilitate a future residential development of a 4 to 5 unit row house. And for council's information, the agent working on the file is on the Zoom meeting today if you do have any questions for them.
Thank you.
So the staff recommendation is that the public hearing report be received for information. And just a bit of the presentation overview. I'll just go over some of the property background details of the proposal, the consultation up to this point, and then the staff recommendation. So the subject property is located at 714 Cedar Street. This is within the Clearview Heights neighborhood. It's currently vacant, forested with steep slopes, and is approximately 0.5 hectares. The subject property was subdivided back in 1909. This was with no established road access until 2018, and this is when the subject property owners planned to develop both 714 and 788 Cedar Street. And in 2018, they entered into a works and services agreement with the city to extend and install the road, water, and sewer within the road right-of-way along the frontage of the subject property and then the neighboring 2 lots to the south. The property is zoned Rural Residential 2 Hectare District, this is RR2, designated Rural Residential T2 in the OCP, and it falls within the environmentally sensitive environmental hazard development permit areas. So this is for both the unstable soil and the riparian areas protection area regulation. So the property is currently not within a form and character development permit area, and then the surrounding lands are vacant with some developed residential properties to the west along Cedar Street. For the proposal details, the application proposes a 4 to 5 unit row house development and to propose it to rezone the subject property to the from RR2 to R3 zone and to amend the OCP land use from T2 to walk-up residential T4. The OCP amendment also includes formally designating the subject property within the multifamily residential and mixed-use development permit area, Area F. And the applicant has submitted a preliminary geotechnical report and a riparian area assessment supporting the proposed development, which they will need to update with a future development permit application. A little bit of the proposal details of the development. The applicant is proposing row house building approximately 450 meters squared, which includes 4 units. It could be potentially up to 5, each approximately 120 meters squared in size, containing 2 floors, a patio, 2 bedrooms, and 2.5 bathrooms. The proposal also includes an attached carport with 8 covered parking spaces and a storage locker area. This is to the rear of the building. The row house building is intended to be used for long-term rentals. Vacation rentals are not permitted in a row housing development. Final details related to building design and landscaping will be confirmed with the submission of a future multifamily residential development permit application. This is if the bylaw is adopted, and then council would be seeing a form and character application of the exterior of the building with parking, landscaping, and the look and feel of the building. Access is proposed via a shared driveway that will service both 714, 788 Cedar Street. The subject property owner plans to develop their 788 Cedar Street property next to the subject property with a single family dwelling. The 2 properties will enter into an easement agreement to legalize the shared access. So for a bit of the consultation background, the application was sent out for referrals from January to February this year. Concerns regarding the fire flow constraints on site were raised by the city's fire rescue services and engineering departments. And staff have worked with the applicant on these concerns, and these will be addressed by a registered professional at the time of building permit stage. And staff have received no other concerns or comments on the subject development from internal or external agencies. The application was presented to the Advisory Planning Commission on July 20th, 2021, and the APC was supportive of the application proposal. Council granted first and second reading at the October 12th, 2021 meeting and directed staff to then schedule the public hearing we have before you today. Staff have scheduled the public hearing and sent the landowner notification letters notifying of the public hearing if any property owners have their property may be impacted by the application. So this was sent to 13 properties within 100 meters of the subject property. The advertisement of the public hearing was placed in the Revelstoke Review on November 25th and December 2nd. Of the 13 properties within the 100 meters, staff have received 1 written letter prior to the public hearing. The owners of the neighboring property wrote in with some concerns over the proposal, which the letter is attached to the staff, the public hearing staff report. That concludes my presentation. We have before you a staff recommendation, and if you have any questions for me, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartling. So, council, we have a motion to receive the report. Someone want to make that motion and read it for me, please? Councilor Palmer.
That the report titled OCP 2020-02 and Zone 2020-06 public hearing prepared by E. Hartling, Director, Planner 2, dated December 7th, 2021, be received.
Second for the motion, Councilor Charlotte. All in favor?
So questions regarding that report?
Go ahead.
So we can do that before the adoption.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So just a question, Ms. Hartling. On the letter that was received, the concerns there, I know you talked to it about a little bit about in their first point, the proposed development does not fit in with the single family residential and tiny homes of the neighborhood. So I think that's kind of obvious and it's kind of addressed, and that's the whole point of the OCP amendments. This is a change, a proposed change on what we see in the future. Just a question, there seems to be maybe a little bit of a contradiction of going to the higher density and still having another single family, and then how does this fit in with the other single family properties on that street? We anticipate the the OCP to be changed for those areas in due course?
Ms. Hartling?
Through your worship, we haven't had any of the other property owners along the Cedar Street to the east of this property and south of this property contact staff about any proposals for redesignating. I'm not sure if that's something that they'd be considering. The neighboring property to the east, the 788 Cedar Street, it's my understanding that the property owners plan to develop that with a single family dwelling. And they have located the proposed row housing units closest to their property to have more of a buffer away from the other single family dwelling properties. If there is any proposals, it would currently be a case-by-case rezoning for what the proposals are. But up to this point, this is the only application or that has been proposed to staff.
Okay, so the other properties would, if they wanted to do something similar in the future, they would require an OCP amendment as well.
Through your worship to Council Palmer, yes, that's correct.
Then my second question to the chair, so there was a statement about concern about higher volume of traffic. You talked about engineering and the fire department talking about concern of fire flows. The traffic, has that been addressed? I'm just wondering, is there any requirements for upgrading the road, or has it been deemed that it's adequate for this additional?
No way, it's not adequate.
Ms. Hartling, your comment?
Through your worship, with the referrals to engineering and discussions with engineering and the applicant, that was not brought up as a issue. I'm not sure if the director of engineering would like to weigh on this, but at this point, the density proposed would not require an upgrade to the road.
That's fine.
Great. All right, thank you. All right, so we've, any further questions on the motion to receive the report? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried, thank you. So I'm going to call the public hearing to order by making a statement. This public hearing is being convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act for the purpose of considering OCP Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2300 and zoning bylaw number 2301. At this public hearing, the public will be allowed to make representations to council, and all persons who believe their interests are affected by the proposed bylaw shall be given the opportunity to address council or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Those of you who wish to speak concerning this proposed bylaw should commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. Please observe the rules. If you have any concerns with the manner in which this hearing is conducted, direct your comments to the chair. Members of council may, if they wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. However, the main function of council members today is to listen to the views of the public. It is not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with individual citizens. Everyone shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making his or her views heard. Sorry, my computer just went off here. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review in the binder located at the sign-in table or alternatively at the city's website. Before we begin, may I have the corporate officer confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act? Ms. Floyd?
All due process was followed, Your Worship.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. If you wish to address this hearing, please raise your hand. Each speaker's initial presentation will be limited to 3 minutes, provided the comments are relevant to the issues at hand and the hearing is not being obstructed. The initial time limit is to allow everyone a fair opportunity to address council respecting the proposed bylaw amendment. After everyone has spoken once, speakers will be allowed a supplementary 2-minute presentation, which will be limited to additional comments to what was previously presented so that everyone that wishes to speak may. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your hand, and I will call each of the participants until all participants have had a chance to speak. In your supplementary presentation, please do not repeat the comments made in your initial presentation. After everyone has had an opportunity to speak, speakers will be allowed a third 2-minute presentation, which will be limited to additional comments to what was previously presented so that everyone that wishes to speak may. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your hand, and the mayor will call each of you until all participants have had a chance to speak. So we will start now. So if there's anyone that wishes to speak, please raise your hand. Jay, could you have the first speaker approach the microphone, please? Okay, could you give us your name and your civic address, please?
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. My name is Eve Duke. I live at 410 Cedar Street. I am 5 lots down from the proposed development. I think it's noteworthy that many of us on the street, because it's a small community, but our lots are large, so we're not within 100 meters, so we were not actually notified that this development was going through. So many of us did not find out about it until it was in the paper. But Councillor Palmer has already voiced some of the very obvious concerns, which many of us are here today to speak about. Overall, I can certainly understand the pros of the development as a former property manager. For those of you who don't know, our property management company housed over 2,000 tenants in town and managed most of the subsidized housing for over 7 years. So I certainly understand the need and the desire for affordable housing in our community. Here are my concerns. Currently, the area of CP Hill has 13 single-family homes and 1 tiny home, all placed on large R1 and R2 lots. There are approximately 30 people, 40 including children, who live in this rural area of town. The proposed development with 5 2-bedroom units will house anywhere from 20 to 30 people. To put that into perspective, this new zoning would be allowing the population to double and 50% of the whole neighborhood to reside on 1 lot. It is my personal opinion that if a development in any area of town were to increase the population by 100% to the development of a single lot, that development would have no way of not changing the look and feel of that area of the community. And it would also trigger a new type of future building. Anyone who spent time on CP Hill, whether on the bike trails, walking trails, or visiting a single-family home in the area, knows a 5-plex apartment-style complex, a walk-up residential complex, does not match the current zoning, does not match the OCP outline, and more importantly, the form and character of the existing community. CP has defined the zoning and the OCP is R1, single-family residential, and R2, rural residential 2-hectare district. I wanted to come today to ensure that all parties involved know this is absolutely, without question, no minor variance change. It will alter the look and feel of this area of Revelstoke and forever change the way that this part of town develops moving forward. While I know the Advisory Planning Commission made a motion in favor of the proposed land use changes, it is also noteworthy that there are individuals on the committee, developers, realtors, who will personally financially benefit from having increased density and the ability to build 5-plexes or sell 5-plex lots on all of Cedar Street. It's an obvious conflict of interest and a bias of the committee that I think is just worth noting that exists. I know that the developer has spoken to their neighbor who plans on currently building a single-family lot. There's several other lots that are up there, and who's to say that as a precedent that is set on what is a rural area of the community, that those lots now increasing in value will either decide to build also multi-unit complexes or sell their lots so that somebody else can build a multi-unit complex. It's less likely that somebody will want to build a single-family home next to a 5-plex, realistically. Despite the developer's best intentions of affordable housing, it will be financially impossible for those units to solve any of Revelstoke's low-income housing problem. I know this as a property manager, and I also know this as somebody who's personally built a house on CP Hill. The building on CP Hill costs $100 to $200 more per square feet than the average build in traditional zones. This is because of water runoff, subterranean water remediation, hill retention, and increased engineering costs. Unless the developer is altruistic CP Hill will force them into charging a maximum amount of rent the market will bear to recoup the unexpected construction costs. Also, after managing over 300 units in town for over 7 years, we know the new landlord's financial need to command higher rents just to cover their basic costs. Simply put, affordable and profitable rental housing is near impossible to build in this location. The hill was never designed for high density and high traffic, being a dirt road with no sidewalks. If you've ever driven or walked up on the hill in the winter, it is not a walk-up, pedestrian-friendly area and was never designed to handle heavy foot traffic or vehicle traffic. It is not uncommon to use crampons and headlamps at night to navigate the hill, and certainly four-wheel drive at a bare minimum. CP is unstable at the very best of times, and the city staff has highlighted this. During the last rain event, which did so much damage to the Trans-Canada Highway and ravaged BC communities, Revelstoke fared well, but CP Hill's vulnerabilities were greatly exposed, particularly on my property, as our entire driveway was washed out with a river and 2 feet of water. Public Works had 3 machines running for 3 days rebuilding the roads on the hill and ensuring that the burst culverts were not going to lead to another landslide. And to my knowledge, there are currently 2 active zones on the hill being monitored. They're in a constant state of slide. And this last storm event exposed 2 foundations of previous homes that were buried in the 1960s landslide.
So, Mr., we are timing things, so I'm wondering, do you have a wrap up, or is this?
I wrap up.
All right.
Okay, let's do, where was my Bible? I'll just skip right there. So, sorry, not there.
You'll have
Okay.
to touch it for a second.
Yep.
Okay, do you want me to just close off?
Yeah.
What I do want to say, and I'll stress this, is that I'm not here to wave our NIMBY flags and saying don't build in my backyard. We welcome you, and I welcome anybody to the CP Hill family, and that's truly what we are. We want Matt and Jamie to build their dream home, or anybody, and for someone else to live in this amazing pocket of community. There's 10 families that live up here. We work up here. We're raising our families up here. We walk our dogs here off leash. We have chicken coops and keep rubber bullets in our guns to ward off bears, and we love everything about living here, and want the new families on the road extension to enjoy it the same way that we have for decades, which is also the reason why we purchased and chosen to live up there. So I think the real reason that we're here is that we know in our heart, after living here for 10, 20, and some of us 40 years, we feel the same thing that the historical city planners, community OCP, and the zoning map is that a high density 5-plex is just may not be best suited for CP Hill.
Great, thank you for your comments. All right, we have Mr. McClintock is here, the agent for the proponent. Do you want to speak just briefly now, Mr. McClintock, before I go to the rest of the public?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. My name is Don McClintock. I'm the architect helping the owners with this development proposal. In response to the previous comments, I would just like to say that the motivation for this development and the desire for the rezoning is largely a function of the disparity between the R1, R2 zoning and the R3. We're not looking to maximize the development potential of an R3 lot, which would theoretically allow to go up to sort of 30 units. This is a modestly scaled development that is not at 5,000 square feet and a 2,500 square foot footprint, is not in fact significantly larger than many of the single family homes in the area. The current proposal again is for 4 units, and we strongly feel and believe that it will not double the density of the neighborhood, and that based on the 2018 housing needs and demand survey, that this kind of development and diversity of housing stock in the city is something of great value. I appreciate the location of the site and its wooded nature. Sort of heavily informs its current RR2 zoning, but it's also a 10 to 15 minute walk from downtown. So its rural character is somewhat in conflict with its adjacency to downtown. So I feel that this is a prime location for a strategic and relatively light sort of increase in density. So again, we would state that, yes, it is an increase in density. It's not a large one. And based on its location and what is available and what would be allowed under the RR2 land use, that this is not only a reasonable proposal, but one that will push development in Revelstoke in the direction that Revelstoke has stated it wants to go. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right, do we have any more speakers? Next one, please. Name and civic address.
Anita Pagata, 490 Cedar Street. My main concern, one of them, is the road. It's only 40 feet wide. In the winter, most of the time, we're down to single lane on there. A lot of times it's really slippery, so you slipping and sliding, hard to walk on, and the road is not now well maintained. It's usually got washboard up and down, potholes all over the place. Half the time it only gets addressed when one of us complain to city. It's not done on a regular basis. It gets really dusty up there because I think they only do dust control once or twice a year. And we live at the top of the hill, and everybody below us has pumps to pump their sewer up. And when those pumps go, if there's low cloud cover, we get sewer smell at our house, and our neighbor also gets it. And I know one other down below gets it as well. So I would like to know if they're going to address that, as well as having one major pump down there instead of every house having their own pump. Are they widening the road? Are they going to better maintain it, or are they going to pave it? Those are concerns, and the amount of traffic with 4 other houses up there, as well as other ones.
Good. All right, thank you, Ms. Palata. Appreciate it. Anyone else?
At that walk, 514 Cedar. Same as what Eve said. Why were we not informed about this? Each lot is up there is over 200 feet long. So why only 100 meters of leeway given to the people that were informed? It is nice to be up there on 1 acre lots.
That's what most of the homes are, 1 acre lots?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So our taxes are triple what anybody else pays downtown here because our footage, our frontage for sewer. Same as Anita said, the illegal road. It's only 40 feet wide. City roads are what, 60 or 65 feet wide?
Okay.
Same thing, potholes. Are they going to pave it, at least? I've got my phone on speed dial to Tina down at Public Works. She sees my number, she says, what do you need, Pat? Potholes fixed or dust control? And I go, no, I've got a tree across the road.
Okay.
There's something different to tell her. Same thing, the sewer smell. Everybody's on a pump down there. They pump up to the front of my house. Low pressure areas, every days, we get the sewer from right downtown here, coming all the way up, because we're the highest on the hill, and coming out our stacks on our houses.
So just, I'm going to ask you a question on that, Pat. So the sewer from All of the city comes up past your place or just your neighborhood, just for clarification?
Well, it's all tied together,
Okay.
all from downtown here.
Okay.
It all filters up that way
Okay.
because it's an open pipe, basically.
Okay. It's the odor that's filtering up?
Yes, and it
Okay.
comes out our roof vents.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. When the city comes up to flush the mains, because we keep complaining that we're getting sewer smell, they suck all the water out of our toilets or push it out because they use so much pressure. And we get toilet water all over our floors.
Okay. Thank you.
And, well, the potholes and the dust, like I said, I'm on speed dial with Tina.
Okay.
And the engineering department doesn't have any complaints about the road. I was complained twice this month.
Okay, thanks for your input. Anything else, Pat?
Nope.
Okay. Anyone else? Please come forward.
Hi, I'm Carrie Knapp. I live at 685 Cedar Street. We're sort of directly below, slightly across, diagonal, I guess, from the proposed property. We know the property developers and we like them quite a bit. We really did want to like this project. I think it addresses density in the city, which I think everyone knows is it's good to have a little bit more density, but unfortunately, I just think it's a little bit large for a lot of the reasons that other neighbors are speaking of in the neighborhood. One of the things I personally feel might affect us directly across is parking. Again, as Nita had mentioned, the road is quite narrow. It's also quite a steep grade, just right up from the entry to our drive. The neighbor often has had anybody who comes to visit who doesn't have a 4x4 vehicle will have a hard time getting up that hill, cresting that hill in the winter. I've often seen lots of sledders trying to bring their trailers up there and they're sliding back and forth and blocking the road. And I personally have been blocked before from that. So I do have a little bit of concern with, the opportunity that there might be if there was a 5-plex with, 2 bedrooms to make it affordable, you might have 20 people, like 20 people living and 20 people might have 20 cars. So I understand and appreciate the fact that there was some thought put into the carport aspects for parking for vehicles, but I can't help but know that there will be quite a few cars parked on the side of the road. It's not wide enough for sidewalks from what I can see. And I just, I don't like the idea of driving out of my driveway and seeing cars lining the roads. As everyone else in the neighborhood mentions, we're all R2 zoning. We have adequate parking for our vehicles in our driveways. So I just think it might cause a bit of a situation. So I think that was just some of the points I wanted to bring up. I mean, I'd be open to seeing maybe like a duplex, possibly a triplex, maybe, but I think it's just 2-bedroom units, possible 5-plex. It's just too much. It's too big for the neighborhood. It doesn't fit the character. So.
All right, thanks for that. Councillor, you have a question?
Just
Serena, we have a question for you. Come on back, thanks.
just the parking issue. I live on Cedar Hill as well. Anytime I walk down Cedar Street, there's cars already along the road.
Okay.
So
you're
is that
saying
easy?
further down, like people parking like for hikes maybe on the trail system, or you mean like further down?
I think just the residents in general park there because they don't want to go down to a steep or up a steep drive. So
okay.
I just noticed a lot of cars that tend to park along the side all the way along from the corner of Maple Street all the way to the end of the cul-de-sac there. Well, there's always an issue with parking on that street.
I can note that as that's probably almost 90 to 100% Michael's house, which does not have adequate parking for the amount of people who reside in his house.
Sort of.
Michael Brooks, yeah. So he's got several people living in there with extra vehicles, campers, etc. But anybody who else who lives on the street has pretty significant parking in their home, like up to anywhere from 4 to 8 vehicles that can fit up there. But Michael's actually does not, and any vehicles that are around the street, they're, I would say 90% of the time they're his.
Further question, a lot of the lots that I've noticed have 2 houses on them. Is that, that's the nature of the area for our 2?
Well, I think a lot of the lots, you'll see our properties actually, we're looking to subdivide. We have a larger family now. We're going to build a second dwelling on our lot. We're looking to go to an R2 zoning, which we feel fits the character of the current neighborhood. And I do think that with larger lots of that size, I think a lot of the property owners are going to be considering subdividing. They certainly have larger lots. They're able to do so. So, going forward, I think, maybe having a bit more consultation with planning as to how people provide adequate parking, that sort of thing moving forward, just given the fact that we have dirt road that's quite narrow, I think it's just something to consider.
You have a follow-up question, Councillor?
And just on the second homes, are they permanent residents or are they Airbnb or vacation rentals or what's the nature of those homes?
I don't know. I mean, I think some of the units are zoned for vacation rentals up there. I think there was a zoning that way. Yeah, no, I mean, we're just curious. I see them up there and I just wonder whether. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Palmer, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, it's Carrie. I have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you, both to you and others that have spoken up. So just sort of getting a sense in how your comments about, possible subdivision. So that's an increase of densification.
That's right.
And so looks like that's, this is what the whole public hearing is about, how we, do we transition, what the character of an area looks like. Mm-hmm. And certainly there's no question that this will change the character of that area. Mm-hmm. And hence my questions regarding about other areas. It seems to me what I'm hearing is, there's an interest of possible, maybe a slower transition or different ideas, but then there's the themes around water and sewer concerns. And you right at the beginning talked about recognize need for more density and that kind of thing. And so in view of all that, do you think that really we should be addressing the entire area and find out what would make sense for that entire street? Taking is that?
Well, I think there's usually the city planners do studies of certain neighborhoods, correct? And they look for to create sort of consistent ideas of what that might look like. So I can see from the committee's perspective when they looked at this, maybe they didn't have enough guidance to really look at how it would have affected the whole neighborhood as a whole, because they are larger properties with larger lots. I can see that it would look beneficial to have a larger development of the size to create more housing, but I think we just don't have the infrastructure from what you're hearing. It's the sewers, it's the roads, it's the fact that when the train is over the tracks, you're pulling a hairpin turn around the corner and hoping that there's nobody flying down the hill there at the same time. So I think density is going to be a struggle up in that neighborhood going forward for sure. And it's just.
Well, are you done, Councillor Palmer? Okay, Councillor Elliott, you have a follow-up question related to the issue that's on the table of the public hearing.
So I guess the main concern that I'm gathering is you're worried about the congestion on the roadway.
Yeah.
Okay, the sewers.
Well, no, I think my main what I'm coming forward with was the parking. The parking was my main concern.
So the roadway itself.
Given the tightness of the roadway, and given the size of the development, I'm just looking at the design, thinking that there's likeliness that there's going to be quite a few people parking on that road. And if you walk down that road towards where they're proposing the development, it's narrow. It's a narrow road. It's going to need to be plowed. And it's with the grade, the steep grade coming right out of the gate, I just think it's going to be a bit of a nightmare and for people that may not have four-wheel vehicles. Yeah, that's personally my concerns.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please state your name.
Virginia Thompson, 1070 Cashado Crescent, Revelstoke. So, I own 2 lots on Cedar Street. I don't live there. I own 711 and 789 Cedar Street, which are across the street and south and below the subject lot, 714. So I'm right under them. There's a road in between. We're across the street, but we're right there. I have a few concerns, some of which have been very well addressed by people who live on Cedar Street. I fear that this development is, as was said, too dense. I mean, if it were duplexes or a duplex, this is a semi-rural neighborhood in character. It's very special. There isn't another neighborhood within walking distance of town or right in town that has 1-acre lots. And that is why people want to live there. It's got a culture and a semi-rural culture attached to it. And that does translate into dollars. People seem to be most worried about that all the time. But, I think if you start having row housing, this is a row housing. I've seen pictures straight across, 4 to 5 units. I'm used to that from the city where I have lived. And that's a completely different animal. And I just think, I agree, it just doesn't fit there. There are other ways of increasing density there that would maintain at least some of the character of the neighborhood. Okay, and I think it would reduce our property values if you want to get at that. I do, I think. And, we haven't sold those lots. Should we? I want to one day. We would probably get less for them because they'd be looking at row housing, to put it sort of crudely. Second, this is a big concern for us, and it may not affect other people in the room, other Cedar Street residents in the same way. It's because we're below this lot. And we know that, this is a very slippery slope, as they say, CPR Hill. And there have to be geotechnical assessments to build anything there for a good reason. There were fatalities just down the street, just west of us there on Cedar Street. After the Trans-Canada Highway went through, there was a slide and people were killed in their house on Cedar Street. So, I think we have to be really cognizant of this special place in that way. So we're worried about a landslide, frankly, right down over into our property. But I'm worried for the people who live in that row housing. I'm worried about anyone who might build on our lots. And for 2 reasons. I mean, there's the history. We already know what kind of a slope it is. Anybody who has ever tried to build there knows. Anybody who's lived there knows. It's an ongoing issue that everyone has to be very careful of. But we live in 2021 and look at what's happening around us in BC. floods, landslides. And we're living in a new era since the Trans-Canada went through, since even 5 or 10 years ago. Climate change is moving in and on us. And so we have to look at things and take that into account, I think, very strongly. And there is new research. I mean, historically, hydrologists have apparently been a bit cautious and not wanted to lightly draw a connection between logging and flooding and landslides, but there is new research, and I've got the paper here. It's from UBC, Faculty of Forestry, 2019, making a direct connection between even a little bit of tree cutting and increased sliding. And I mean, it's all down in, formulas and so on. It's scientific. It's published by UBC. And it will be read into the record. Just a little summary, but I would encourage you to look it up. I think this research needs to be taken into account. They have made a direct scientific connection between logging and flooding and sliding. And now they've got it down to how much logging and where and what kind of slope, but this is already a dangerous slope. And they've got it down to, logging roads. So the other thing is, so this lot, you should go there. I mean, it's a beautiful place. Our lots are just so beautiful. It's full of forests. So they're going to have to cut quite a bit of that forest to build this, more than if they were just building a house or even a duplex. And they're going to have to cut into the slope, as far as I can see, like right back into the slope in a very wide way for 4 to 5 units. And that is, they talk in this paper about logging roads, increasing the risk of flooding and landslides. And they talk about any development that cuts like a logging road, doing the same kind of thing. So I really think that this is not just your ordinary slope, your ordinary development, and we're in 2021 with climate change, and the new research recognizes these connections. And I would like council to take that into very serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Is there another speaker?
We do have one submission that needs to be read.
Okay, so yeah, I forgot about that. So Ms. Floyd, are you going to read that out, the submission?
Your worship, am I coming through clearly?
Yes, you are, Ms. Rousseau. Please read this out.
Thank you, your worship. This submission was submitted at the meeting today from Virginia Thompson and reads, non-stationary frequency pairing reveals a highly sensitive peak flow regime to harvesting across a wide range of return periods. A common approach used by forest hydrologists to understand and quantify how forest harvesting affects floods was proclaimed flawed by a 2009 landmark study. With a century of forest hydrology research now questioned by academics and by governments alike, you and ALIA were compelled to develop a new method known as non-stationary frequency analysis to evaluate continuous forest harvesting and regrowth effects on floods. The application of this method is demonstrated on the Greta Creek Camp Paired Watershed Study Site in the snow environment of British Columbia, Canada. The method reveals a highly sensitive flow regime to forest harvesting in a mid-elevation south-facing zone of the watershed summarized as follows. 1. Tree removal increased the magnitude of frequency of floods across not only small and medium, but also large events. 2, floods can be sensitive to even small rates of forest harvesting, depending on location within the watershed. For instance, the removal of only 11% of the watershed's trees doubled the frequency of floods of all sizes, as a result of a 9 to 14% increase in the magnitude of such floods. Number 3, depending on the extent of harvested area and the size of flood events, Larger harvest or cut rates resulted in 2-, 3-, and 4-fold increases in the frequency of large floods. These outcomes return counter to the prevailing wisdom in hydrological science. The co-authors suggest that these outcomes have major implications for the safety of drainage structures, such as bridges and dams, human settlements, drinking water quality, and the sustainability of riverine ecosystems. The co-authors call for a reevaluation of past studies based on this new method. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Rousseau. All right, I'm going to go back. I see Mr. McClintock, I know your hand's up, but we'll get back to people speaking a second time in a moment. So is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak for the first time? None? Saying none? Okay, Mr. McClintock, I will come to you now to speak for your second time.
All right, thank you very much. Just to go through a few notes and respond to some of the comments that have been made. Everybody is correct. It is an engineering challenge. It's an engineering challenge on that site, whether we're building a single family home, which we would be permitted to do so, or whether we would build the proposed 4-unit row house that we're proposing. I think there's a bit of a false dichotomy between the density we're proposing and the engineering. When the services and the road were extended out on Cedar Street by the owners of these lots, or in conjunction with them, city engineering signed off on everything and feel that it is perfectly adequate for the proposed density on the site. The development permit process we're going through is pretty intensive, with geotechnical and riparian reports being required. So all of the due diligence is being done in terms of how to safely develop any kind of property, regardless of density, on that lot. This would be a challenge for anybody else living on Cedar Street, whether, as some have mentioned, they intend to subdivide and build new single-family homes. So in terms of the engineering concerns and the infrastructure, I think that has been addressed and been gone through with the city to a standard that they find that is found to be acceptable. In terms of concerns of the sort of the density and the character of the building, based on the R2 zoning, if we wanted to make this building a single family home rather than have 4 units in it, like, we'd be permitted to do so. So I think the argument that it's out of scale with the rest of the neighborhood is a bit misleading. At 5,000 square feet, it's certainly large. It's not unreasonably large. And if we were to subdivide the lot, given its size, as some of the other people on the street have mentioned they intend to do, we could actually achieve a higher density with single family homes on subdivided lots in Cedar Street than we're proposing. And I think that the interest in consolidating that density into a single building actually helps preserve a lot of the nature and a lot of the forests and a lot of the rural feel of the neighborhood. In fact, better than subdividing and building more discrete buildings on that site would achieve. I think that's my comments. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak a second time in 2 minutes? Stu?
All I can say is this engineering, I'm aware, I'm sure that the city has looked at this. I mean, of course, everything, I said that, everything you build there has to have a geotech. What I am saying is that assessment, and will council look at this in terms of the latest research? I'm sure they haven't seen that study. I mean, I'm not, but I bet they haven't, that I just highlighted for people here. And I really feel that needs to be addressed before this goes ahead. And This is 2021, and we're in the midst of climate change, and things that were used to do assessments even 5 years ago need to be revisited, in my view. Thank you. If something happens there, don't tell me I didn't warn you.
Mr.
Thanks. So grim. But I think it's pretty, I'm also with my neighbor here that I don't think you can just like literally wash away that there's a significant hill and engineering problem. We built a home up there. So we have, and answer your question, Rob, we have 2 lots. We built a house there. We had to do geotech. We had to do engineering. Every single year, we still fight with the hill and fight with the water and fight with the runoff and fight to keep the hill basically back from washing away and tearing out our driveway and our property. So engineering aside, we've been down that road 8 years ago and we're still dealing with it, with the geotech and everything that we had to do in place to build there on our lot, which was also again on a steep grade. That being said, and then I also just wanted to address that, or just let you guys know that we, not everyone who lives in the community is able to be here and chat. There's 13 houses up there, and out of 8 that I was, which was everybody that I was able to speak to, either had a concern or was opposed. So this is a big portion of our community, but there's more people who, and I think if the developers had walked around the community and had maybe taken the time to ask people, hey, does this make sense? Does this work? What are your concerns? They would have found that out so easily. It was palatable as far as everybody who I've talked to that lives up there right now. So yeah, it's not just us here. There's more people who live on that street who are concerned as well. So.
Anyone else like to speak for a second time? Yes.
I do believe on these lots that they're proposing to build on, there was 3 different little water sources coming down the hillside there that they've put culverts across the road. So are they going to be digging them out and then damming them up with a foundation? And yes, and pushing the water to a different culvert, which is going to go downstream to the houses down below and changing all the water sources and making their property slide too.
Anyone else like to speak a second time? Okay, I will go to a third and final time. Does anyone want to speak for a third and final time?
Our streams coming down through there. I forgot to mention that. Thank you, Pat. Yeah, we were very concerned when they put the road in that there were proper culverts. We kept going and checking. We talked to the construction people. We talked to the owners of the new properties. And yeah, I mean, that is a good question. If you're going to build something like that, there are at least 2 streams, 3 coming down there. And I've read because of all these floods, I've read that one of the problems is that if you run water across too far, I'm not a hydrologist, but so if they did stop one culvert and run it across, that can precipitate, it's more likely to precipitate a slide. You know, I don't want our property to slide either. We have a lot of water on our property running through it, and it's coming down from these 2 lots above us, 714 being one of them. So it's a very, very wet end of Cedar Street.
Councillor, you have a question?
Well, just maybe that's towards our planning department. The geotechnical elements and the stamp that an engineer has to put on a document to guarantee or certify that property is safe. includes once they contain the water, where it goes. They don't just end it at the property line. Right? They have to have a full plan, how to control the water, where to disperse it, and what the consequences might be. I've gone through this many times, and I've had to, guarantee my second child that I will, control the water. So I appreciate the concern about the flooding, but any geotech worth of salt or engineer worth of salt would say, we have to control this because the guy down directly below you is going to be affected by it. That's just on that particular instance.
Great, well, appreciate that. So I see staff have on the screen. So any comments, Mr. Black or Mr. Simon, pertaining to this, or no?
Staff is available to answer any additional questions as stated by staff member Hartling. All the geotechnical and civil has been completed and to our satisfaction. And of course, their engineers are also liable for their reports. So we are not in a position to question their professionalism or question the outcome and findings of those studies. Staff are comfortable with the reporting that has taken place in support of this project. And any further questions we can certainly address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. So I'm going to ask, is there anyone in the gallery that would like to read? Ms. Bylaw, please come forward.
Hi, it's the geotech.
All that know their jobs, and you can divert the water. We have constant springs popping up on our property, and the water tends to run down our driveway, so we divert it off, and we've dug a ditch down the side of our property so the water goes down there. But 9 times out of 10, the water is running down the road because it's got nowhere to go out of there. It just seeps out of the ground. So it's not that it's just anyone. It just seeps out of the ground wherever it wants, and it's constantly moving around.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Councilor Palmer, you have a question?
Yeah, so a question to Director of Engineering. Steve, the hydrology studies or the geotech studies out there, that would have been specifically for the proposed development. I'm assuming it didn't take the entire Cedar Street in direct consideration. Would that be accurate? Or?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, I'll defer much of that question to the planning department, as much of this is in some environmental areas that are of great concern, i.e. water. However, the reports are done specific for each property related to this development. And related to the larger picture, staff member Hartling or Mr. Simon could provide some more background on the area. Thank you.
I do have the geotech plans from back when the slide happened, when the highways did after that happened. And most of it up there is clay and barred clay with gravel pits.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Palahniuk. Ms. Hartling or Mr. Simon, either one of you want to make comments regarding the hydrology?
Yeah, through your worship. So the applicants have done, so they've done a works and services agreement. They've done preliminary studies for the geotechnical and the riparian area, and they will have to complete additional studies for the final issuance of a development permit. So they've done the preliminary works, full studies, and then for the subject properties, it is for the property itself. They will be completing, before issuance of a development permit and a covenant on title, a full geotechnical evaluation, which is a professional reliance model that it does push the liability onto the professional, and staff rely on these professional studies to be able to issue the technical permits. So at the time of a development permit and building permit, the technical studies will be finalized. At this point, it's looking at if this is the type of use and density suitable for this community. Just to reiterate, staff is supportive of diversified housing, and this is the type of development that we are looking at here. So yeah, those technical studies do need to be finalized, and the preliminary works have been supported by staff and done by a professional engineer, and riparian area assessments are completed by a qualified environmental professional. Not sure if Mr. Simon has anything to add.
Okay, all right, thank you. You have a question, Councillor Elliott?
If this was declined and the proponent chose to subdivide, how many lots could he get out of that one single lot?
Comment from staff, Ms. Hartman?
How big is the lot?
Yeah, maybe that's.
Is it 1 acre? Is it 2 acres? It's 1 acre.
So we'll let staff comment if you don't mind, please. Ms. Hartman? You know the size of this overall lot?
Through your worship, let me just check the zoning, and I can get back to you if you want to move on to one other question. I can provide you with the size.
All right, thank you, appreciate that. We'll have that for you in a minute.
No, I've just gone through it. I had a half-acre lot, and the option was to subdivide it into 3. And I could have built 3 single-family homes with a suite in each one, but I chose to go after a 4-plex and was put through the right. But anyway, I went through a whole story on that, but it sounds like the same story.
Okay, all right, so I am going to call one more time. Basically, before closing this public hearing, I shall call 3 times for any further speakers on any matters contained in the proposed bylaw. So for the first time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? Please come forward.
As Rob knows, he always walks up and down the hillside there, and right above CPR Hill, or CPR Station, there is about a 4x4 piece of steel pipe sticking out of the ground. And about 90% of the year, there is water pouring out of it. Where's that coming from? I don't know if it's a well but that's how much water is on that hillside. Is it drinkable or?
Forever, I don't know what it is.
All right, thank you, appreciate that comment. So for this second time, is there someone else that's coming, Jay? All right, thank you.
I don't feel reassured. They say the geotechnical engineering report has been completed. Well, I'm asking, would they please review it in light of this new research? Unless they can show me they were already using it as part of their assessment. I beg this city and this council and this staff to take this new research into the connection between deforestation, which this is a forested steep slope at the top of the hill from the highway down to the tracks, that is going to lose some forest and have a gouge cut into it. Now, Rob's property is at the bottom of that hill. I mean, from between the highway and the tracks, you know, this is at the top and right above us. And I would like some reassurance that they've been using the latest science that has some new things to say about this, as well as this new council, I think council can say, yes, climate change puts a new light on things. Thank you.
Mr.
Yeah, I just want to just reiterate again and stress that it's a zoning change from the official community plan for that area. And I think if we think a little bit bigger about, is this an appropriate zoning? Is this actually going to solve our problems for housing? It's not going to be affordable. You can say all day long, it's not going to be a big impact, but 4 units times 2 people each, 5 units times 2 people each, of course, that's a huge impact to a community that's only 13 houses right now. Is this the best area of town to set a precedent that we're going to scorch the earth essentially with high density housing? And honestly, I just feel like this area of town, if you go there, it's so special. People use the trails, they walk on the trails. There's houses, as we've seen on large lots. We're all working together as a community and feel like we're a community up there. And a high density walk up apartment building. There's places in our community that are built for that. We've seen Arrow Heights, like it's gone. You had large high density lots, it's over. I just think this is one of the last places of town, despite its proximity. Does that mean that we should put as much high density as possible? Or I just think it's about preserving what our community looks like. And I think it's pretty clear where the residents of CP Hill feel on that, because it's a pretty amazing place to live for average people. Like, we're not millionaires building a multi-million-dollar house up on Nickel Road. Like, we're just trying to have our chickens and let our kids play on the dirt road, basically. Yeah. So I think it's just such a big precedent that we're setting if you change from a rural zoning to a walk-up high density zoning. There's so much that goes there that, despite his building, it's the other lots around, ours included, that changes and changes the opportunity there for better or for worse.
Okay, thank you. Okay, for the second time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representation?
Online.
Okay, Mr. McClintock, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate, I think that it is not a large increase in density. The number of units that are being proposed relative to what could be put there and what has been talked about being proposed to put there is not out of line, nor is the building out of scale with the surrounding neighborhood and the size of homes. If the zoning guidelines offered something in the middle between R1, R2, and R3 that was more sympathetic to sort of this number of units, we certainly would have done that. We're not trying to build apartment buildings on the side of the hill. We're trying to do a modest increase in density in support of the city's stated goals, and in a way that we feel is the most responsible and the least impactful relative to something like subdivisions and more individual buildings on that lot. So yeah, that's our stance. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So, for the third time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representation? Do you have a comment, Councilor? No? Councilor Ryan?
We defer to Ms. Hartling to see if she has an update on the size of the lot. I'd be interested in that side.
Yep. Ms. Hartling, do you have the answer on the size of the lot at this point?
Yeah, through your worship. So the lot would not be permitted to be subdivided under the current RR2 zone. You actually need to have 2 hectares for each lot to be subdivided. This is a historic zoning brought in from the regional district. So these are the larger lots that, if anyone along this block on Cedar Street, you'll see an application later today. If anyone's looking to subdivide, typically they would need to rezone to an R1 or R2 zone in order to subdivide their lot for a single family or a duplex. So the applicant today is looking for the R3 zone as the R2 zone for duplexes, and the R3 zone, as he said, do not quite align. So the R3 zone is the next zone allowing the row house development.
Great. Councilor Palmer, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, a question to Ms. Hartley. So I think you addressed this before, but I want to make sure it's clear in my mind. If the application was to rezone to R2, would an OCP amendment be required or not?
Through your worship, I believe an OCP amendment would not be required. I may refer to Mr. Simon, as he does have a rezoning for an R2 zone for a property nearby, and I believe there is no OCP amendment with it. And I'll just get Mr. Simon to weigh in on that.
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship to all of council, I have the luxury of being able to look at our geocortex system and double check all the mapping while Ms. Hartling is answering questions here. So the subject properties here, 714 Cedar, as well as a few others that are right at the end, they all have a different land use than the remaining properties under the OCP. So properties that are further west along Cedar all hold the T4L duplex residential land use that would basically not require someone to amend the OCP if they were going to R2, something along those lines, R3 potentially. And then if you are at the end of Cedar Street, like the subject property is, you have a rural residential land use under the OCP. So even if this property was looking at going to R1 or R2, they would still require that OCP amendment, whereas other properties on Cedar Street further west would not require an OCP amendment for rezoning.
Councilor Palmer.
So through the mayor, Mr. Simon, so how many are in the rural residential? How many, just number of properties are rural residential in the Cedar?
Through your worship, Councillor Palmer, there are 5 properties on the block, all at the far east end of Cedar Street.
Okay, and the other properties, if they wanted to, hypothetically, if they wanted to put a fourplex on, would they require OCP amendments?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, these are hypothetical situations are always challenging because whenever someone wants to go through the process to rezone, part of staff's evaluation is determining whether or not the proposed application is actually consistent with that OCP land use. And if it's not consistent, then an OCP amendment would be required in order to get support. So without actually having an application on any of those lands for staff to complete a full review, it's very challenging to discuss hypotheticals as to whether or not they would need to amend the OCP to be consistent with their land use, which is different than the land use of the subject property.
So through the mayor, yeah, just for clarity, the motivation behind the question, I recognize the challenge of that and not getting caught in a statement, a public statement that could haunt you later. At the same time, what I'm hearing from the residents and on the whole street is there's a sense of character of that street, which is rural residential, but from the zoning, or from the zoning perspective, that rural residential is only the far end. And so it seems to me that that one of the questions that we're hearing is this consistency, and that's the motivation. But I'll accept that you can't specifically answer that. I'll take a look at the OCP and zoning just to get a sense of from my perspective. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you, Councilor. So I will just ask for the last time, is there anyone who wishes to speak further? Please come forward.
Just have a question.
I mean, immediately when I heard that the zoning was different on the east end of Cedar Street and it's rural residential, I know that because that's where our lots are. Why is it different? That's my immediate, nobody's asked it. I was waiting for someone to say, why are the lots at the east end zoned differently? I mean, there may be, this is not my area. There may be lots of different kinds of reasons. Is it because they're very wet? They're wetter and they're more difficult, or is it just a leftover from land use planning from before, or what is it?
Thompson, rather than Simon, regarding Ms. Thompson's question about the difference in the zoning along that street.
Through your worship and to all of council and the community, I just want to clarify, it's a difference in land use designation under the OCP, which helps guide rezoning applications. I guess if we had to try and make a logical connection as to why the land use is different for those 5 properties compared to the remaining properties, this part of the city was annexed in 1981 into the city, and as Ms. Hartling indicated, it carried forth a lot of zoning and land use designation from the CSRD. Those 5 properties, from what I can tell from an aerial view, are the only undeveloped properties on Cedar Street. So when staff were redoing the OCP and assigning new land uses in 2009, it would have been logical for them to assign the duplex residential land use to already developed properties and keep the historic rural residential land use to undeveloped properties. That would be the best I would be able to ultimately determine based on the logic of the situation.
Okay. All right.
And, through your worship, I think Ms. Hartling may have something to add on to that.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, yes, through your worship. Also, these lots that were subdivided back in 1901, they also did not have a road connecting to them. So the other lots that were developed, and this is just us making assumptions because we weren't here at the time when staff redesignated and zoned these lots, but there were not services or roads to these, and so they remained the larger land use designation.
Thank you. And just to confirm the date, 1981, is that correct? So I thought I heard 2 dates, 1981 or 1901. I just want to confirm when these were annexed into the city.
Through your worship, 1901 was when the land was subdivided.
All right, good. And then the annexation, Mr. Simon, 1981.
That's correct, 1981.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. All right, because I can't see everyone in the room, I will ask for the final time. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Okay, seeing that there are no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. I want to thank you all very much for your submissions. I'll now call for a motion to close the public hearing. So, someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Shillette, second by Councillor Ryan. All in favor? Motion's carried. This public hearing is now closed. We're going to take a 3-minute break, comfort break, and then we will carry on with the rest of the agenda. Thank you all. Thank you for coming today, community, and for giving your input. It is much appreciated.
Oh my God.
Oh, we're here for it. Welcome back, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.
Here you're culprit on the parking on your road.
Yeah, we heard you got lots of people living at your house.
Oh yeah, dope. I just have a lot of vehicles.
Are they yours?
Well,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, true.
I just sold one. I had 3. Now I have 2. And then my girlfriend has one.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Engineering.
Well, we shouldn't have to pick up because I'm.
Engineering says that,
Yeah, we're.
engineering says, are we, okay, just regarding the road. It is trouble, it's narrow. But, is it like your property, is it infringing on the road? Or is it usually the roadway, city roadway, if there's a right of way? Like, that buffers before, the road has a certain distance. There has to be a certain width. I think, doesn't it? You lose some land if you, if they improve the road, that's what I'm getting at.
No, like the road right of way is quite, like the road right of way basically comes up to, but yeah, I would, because they have to move the retaining wall. And the property line, so some of the retaining walls on my property, some of it's off. It's retaining wall, it's almost straight, but it's like that. But then my driveway is mostly on the road right of way. And my neighbor's property. Nothing straightforward up there.
I know. The sewer smell. Do you suffer from it?
I know what he's talking about. It's like just, if you're walking on the road, it comes and goes.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, sometimes, and my neighbors say they smell it quite a bit.
But that's just, yeah, it's just the high point of the hill, high point of the sewer system. The gas escapes.
Something where it's actually more exactly less. Probably something where it's actually less. More flow, less.
Yeah, exactly. Unless it comes out.
If it's just sitting in the hospital, smelling.
Yeah.
But if it's flowing,
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. It's a good theory.
Okay, council, we're going to carry on. Item 5B, Development Services, Development Variance Permit for 21 Johnson Way. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councillor Elliott.
That development variance permit, DVP 2021-011, 21 Johnson Way, strata lot 21, section 25, township 23, range 2, west of the 6th, Meridian, Kootenai District, strata plan N88, as per
package.
per package.
All right. Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Staff are here if you need to ask a question. This is basically a mobile home that has been placed when it was originally placed within a few centimeters of where it should be, so they're just trying to correct that now. Any questions? Councilor Palmer?
So through to Mr. Simon, these seem to crop up fairly regularly. How many more of them are there?
Through your worship, Councillor Palmer, there are no more that are currently in our application queue. Again, this is something that staff have been quite diligent about at building permit stage to convey to applicants. It is incredibly important that when you are siting mobile homes, when you are pouring foundations, that you have your surveyor on site to pin it accordingly to make sure that you are complying with setbacks. Staff have gone above and beyond, in my opinion, to add conditions onto building permits to make sure that the setbacks are adhered to. Again, this is something that it inevitably does come up from time to time. It is unfortunate when it's had to be dealt with retroactively, but they are the situations that we do find ourselves in, and one of the options at the applicant's disposal is to apply for a development variance permit.
Yeah, so just comment. I'll support the motion. It is that sort of ongoing concern, and unfortunately, what this does is create bureaucracies need to do more and more stuff. Like, do we require a legal survey before foundation inspections? And it's unfortunate, but thank you for the diligence of staff keeping on it.
Any further comments or questions from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Just going on, just a couple things here, announcements from the mayor. So this month we are focusing on our bylaw regarding idling. So just for the community, allowing your vehicle to idle is not what we want. There is a bylaw against that. So written a little message into the paper this week. Definitely idling is something that is injurious to health and to our environment. So just encourage all people to turn their cars off if they're going to be stopped for 60 seconds or more, and that will definitely help everyone concerned. And also, as we are now heading into our snow removal season, just encourage people to make sure they're diligent with their parking. If you can get your vehicle off of the street so our equipment can do their thing, we'd be appreciative of that. All right, thank you. We're going to move on to item 9A, and this is a zoning amendment bylaw for 307 Downey Street. Someone want to make the first motion for me, and then if we have any questions, Mr. Simon is here. Councilor Palmer.
That second reading for zoning amendment bylaw 2285 be rescinded.
Second for the motion, please. Councilor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on the motion? We are rescinding this second reading of zoning amendment because it is now coming back to change from no secondary suites to secondary suites. So we're rescinding that original motion. So, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Someone want to put item number 2 on, please? Councilor Palmer?
So I do have a question on the motion before I make it. So we're, it says first and second reading the same bylaws first and second time, but we didn't rescind first reading. I'm just...
Any comment, Mr. Simon? Do we need to read, Mr. Tucker, do we need to rescind the first reading when the second reading was the last reading done? I think in the past, like we just did this past couple of weeks ago at a public hearing, I rescinded second reading and we brought it back.
You can certainly rescind second reading, and that would be in order.
Okay. Any further comment, Mr. Simon, regarding this?
To your worship, I would go to our corporate services group, but I believe that we're fine as the resolution is as amended on the second resolution that's on the table.
So I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2285 be read at first and second time as amended.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott, any discussion on the motion?
I'd like to speak to a motion.
Go ahead.
Just to thank you to staff for taking it back and working with the developer on this. I think this is a very good place for higher density that we're going to see, and does address affordable housing issues. So just to thank you on continue to work through that.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon, for that. Moving on to item 9B. Someone want to make this motion, please? Councillor Charlotte.
The development cost charges amendment bylaw number 2288 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on the motion? This has been discussed several times, went out to the provincial government. They've approved it, and now it's coming back for us to adopt. Any other comments, Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor. So I think I've expressed my disappointment on the DCC, where we've been and how long it's going to take for us to actually do a robust look at the DCC. We're looking at another year and a half before we're doing anything. This is just an inflationary increase. The reasons to support this is we do get an incremental increase to the DCCs. The reasons to not support it is one, promise that I made during the by-election that of looking to reduce DCCs for infill development, whereas we're going to actually be increasing doing the exact opposite, and this addresses affordable housing things. The other reason is I think this is a failure. Unfortunately, 3.5 years ago, there was promises being made, 3 years ago, promises being made to do significant changes to DCCs. I think based on the weight of it, I think this is likely going to pass, but I have to consider whether that's sending the wrong message. I do applaud the work that staff is doing for in the future, so there's more engineering studies, so we'll be looking at that. It's probably going to be 2 years from now, year and a half before we're actually looking. Well, we won't be able to do it for a full year after it's approved by the province. So those are my comments. I just wanted to express those.
Thank you. Any further comments from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Mayor Sulz, I'm opposed.
Oh, pardon me. Thank you. For the record, please note that Councillor Palmer is opposed. My apologies, Councillor. Item 9C. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Brooks Hill.
The official community plan bylaw number 2297 be adopted.
Okay. Seconder for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Elliott?
So is this official community plan bylaw, does this have the greenhouses included in it?
No, that's not this one. You want to make comment on that, on this, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, Councillor Elliott, the reference to greenhouses and regulations for greenhouses is contained within the zoning bylaw, which is item 9E.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right. Any further comment or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried, thank you. Moving on to item 9, are we 9D, pardon me. Councillor Brooks-Hill?
The official community plan amendment bylaw number 2298 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, just like to make a comment, this council decoupled this from the bylaw that we had just passed, which is an accomplishment for council and for staff. Thank you. And I think that process, even though we're ultimately adopting for the Thomas Brook area, I think this was a good exercise, and I support the motion.
Great, thank you. Any further comments from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item E. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Elliott.
Zoning bylaw number 2299 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Palmer.
Just, I guess, a question to the mover. So this is the zoning bylaw that will be changing the greenhouses.
So we're going to have a discussion once it's on the table.
Okay,
right?
sure.
Okay, so you're okay moving it, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Palmer seconding it, is that correct?
I can second it.
Okay, all right. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Elliott?
Yes, I know greenhouses were talked about at the APC meeting briefly. You know, my take on greenhouses, they're not pretty. And we're considering putting them on the front lawn. And generally, I don't know, it creates another level of bureaucracy. We have to enforce them or I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. To me, I'd be much more in favor of this bylaw if that greenhouse provision was removed.
And Councillor Palmer.
I concur with Councillor Elliott, and I would propose an amendment to the third reading to strike out the provision of greenhouses in front yards.
Okay, so you're seconding for that motion. Councillor Elliott is seconding it, so we're going to vote on that.
I'll speak to the...
Go ahead.
So this was brought up before. There's a lot of work that's gone into the zoning bylaw. This was a good idea of how we allow more urban farming, food security, and all that kind of thing. Weighing out what that's going to look like with greenhouses, basically unregulated. They're 100 square feet. People can build whatever they want as long as it complies. I think Councillor Elliott pointed out that most greenhouses are used windows, and it's just not going to enhance the communities. It could degrade the neighborhoods, and really they belong more in the backyard, and that doesn't stop us from being able to have urban gardening in the front yard. So even well-built greenhouses could detract from the ambience, the neighborhood in the front yard. So I think it's something that needs to be taken out of the zoning bylaw.
Okay, any other comments from council? Councillor Brooks-Hill.
Well, I can appreciate that maybe someone might put up an ugly greenhouse. That doesn't mean they will. And you can already build an ugly shed that's under 100 square feet in your front yard. No? No? No. Okay, maybe not. But a greenhouse, basically people are gonna build a greenhouse where it gets the most sun. And whether that's the front yard or the backyard, I don't find it a compelling argument that a greenhouse might be unsightly, so we're gonna have to put it in the backyard, which is inevitably gonna preclude some people from building a greenhouse. Some people don't have a backyard. Some properties in Revelstoke, there's a lot of irregular properties, and a lot of properties don't have a backyard, or their backyard is shaded or something, so the only logical place to put a greenhouse is in the front yard.
Okay, thank you. Any Councilor Palmer, you have a comment?
So just to counter Councilor Brooks Hill, last point, I continue to, most greenhouses, even nice greenhouses, are going to be a distraction in the front yard in most neighborhoods. That's my point. And it's going to be hard to do anything about ugly ones. And most small ones, basically, people are trying to be thrifty with gardens and doing that. And it's used windows in front yards. It doesn't belong there, and I think it's fine in the backyard. But furthermore, if there is special needs for a particular home to have a variance in the front yard, that should go through a variance process.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Elliott.
Do we have any current regulations on where they can go and where they can't?
Mr. Simon, any comment on that?
To your worship, greenhouses would be considered an accessory building, so they would need to comply with the accessory building regulations. The intent of providing additional allowances for them in the front yard was to kind of identify them as a unique accessory building and hence have those additional regulations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether it's helping us or hindering us right now. I mean, every greenhouse that I can, on my street, just down the road, there's plastic ones, there's glass ones with broken windows, there's whatever leftover piece of glass you can put on the greenhouses, that's what people use. And they're not attractive, inviting elements to a neighborhood. I would think people would be embarrassed at it in the front yard. But if you want to, I just think it's something unnecessary to be included in a bylaw update or a zoning update right now. So we've gotten this far without them. Why do we need to bother with it?
Okay, any further comments? Councilor Charlotte.
Thank you, Worship. I'm hearing the concerns around the look and the feel in the neighborhood due to the potential of a greenhouse in the front yard. I wonder, and I'm trying to find the notes, I'm sorry I did not have this pulled up fresh to hand for this conversation. Because I thought that we had talked about this in a past meeting, where there are still regulations around if they were going to put this accessory building, a specific case of the greenhouse in the front yard, they would still have to comply with certain rules, even though it wouldn't have to come for a variance permit. And as much as Councillor Palmer said they can build whatever they want as long as it complies, to me those don't fit because it has to comply, so it's not whatever you want. I'm concerned about not amending this at this point. We've discussed food security being a concern of our community and making it easier for people to grow their own food. As Councillor Brooks Hill brings up, somehow a lot of homes in our community, the light aspect just does not suit a greenhouse in the backyard. So opening the door for people to be able to do so in their front yard, if it means for better clearance from property lines and for better light exposure, sometimes it just makes sense. Now, if we want to look at more regulation around what does it count, what does it take to comply with those regulations to be able to build that greenhouse, then perhaps that's the conversation we need to have. But as Councillor Elliott suggested, compliance in our community is not always 100% adherence to these regulations. We end up with unsightly outbuildings, we end up with unsightly yards. But to deny everyone the opportunity to even entertain the idea because of that past experience to me seems overly cautious, especially when it comes to a topic like this. With climate change being what it is and the greenhouses and shelters that I've seen for gardens to extend the season in our mountain valleys, it's really quite ingenious what people have done, and some of them are quite appealing, I think, and help to build up that character of the neighborhood that we do value food production and that everyone deserves to be able to grow their own food. So to paint it all with this brush of broken windows and cheap plastic, I think misses the point of the opportunity that we're facing here. I, for one, would like to keep this in the zoning bylaw as it stands. If it were to be amended to remove it, I would expect to have a fulsome conversation in the next phase of the zoning bylaw updates so that we can figure out what does this look like to make this a possibility in our community.
All right, appreciate comments. Councilor Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So just in response to my esteemed colleague across the way, most of what you say I agree with. So the urban farming, encouraging food production, I think is super, super important. I'm strongly supportive of it. When I first saw this, the greenhouse concept, because it was at a workshop, I did a workshop, and it was one of the things I said, oh yeah, that's cool. I really like this idea. So philosophically, I really, really like the idea. Councillor Elliott did bring out a practical side of what this is likely to look like. And that started my thinking as to whether they belong, greenhouses belong in front yards or not. When I state they can do whatever they want, it's within the regulation. So if they're 100 square feet or less, then they can build. They don't have to go get a building permit. They can just go build this thing, and there's no controls. And that is the area of concern. So I will be voting in favor of the amendment. If it fails, like you, I expect us to have a robust conversation after, just to look at what new regulations we can put in place to ensure we don't get ugly buildings, ugly broken glass, plastic things in front yards.
All right, thank you. Any further, Councillor Sherrod?
And just to follow up on that, thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, Councillor Palmer, because yeah, the conversation I remember was that we were all supportive of the concept, and I recognize the concerns around unsightly yards. I've dealt with it quite often myself in my various living accommodations in this community. And yeah, how do we regulate unsightly yards and sightly yards? How do we define what we want to see in our neighborhoods and in our front yards? And where do we want to put the rules on that in a way that it is going to be equitable, where it does not get applied because of someone's popularity in the community, where it is less subjective and more defined? So when it comes to noxious weeds, that's an easy one. If you have an invasive weed problem in your yard, you need to deal with that. And we should have bylaws that enforce that. I think that our community is changing dramatically, and the aesthetics that go with that change have shifted. So to have a robust conversation as part of our OCP and our zoning next phases is, this is how we've defined it in the past. Does that still stick? Is there an equity issue that we can address and make better so that no matter your income level, you have a sightly yard? And we can define what it means to have a well-kept home and a good-looking yard that doesn't have to do with the quality of the materials, in as much that we're looking at the value of them, right? Where you have to have granite countertops in order to have a sightly kitchen, right? This is the kind of conversations that I've seen in a lot of cases where what does a modest home look like in our neighborhoods that can have things like a greenhouse that might not be flashy, but it's not broken windows. So finding that middle ground and defining those edges around that as a community that we can get behind. I could see where the concerns come from having disagreements between neighbors and upset neighbors around what they consider to be sightly and unsightly. And I understand that that's a big rabbit hole to be really cautious of going down. I hope that we can come up with something over time, whether it's with this bylaw or the next phase of these bylaws, that we can come up with something that the community can get behind and understand as a whole.
All right, thank you for your comment, Councillor Elliott.
So I'm all for growing a garden. We can grow it in your front yard, get rid of the lawn, I don't care. It really doesn't matter. I just think we're having a conversation on something that doesn't need to be included in the bylaw, because basically it's an accessory building. We allow accessory buildings if they meet a certain standard. What more do we need to say about it? Why do we need to promote greenhouses if 90% of greenhouses are not pleasant to look at? And you're putting them in your front yard, and if you put that at narrow heights and someone's got this multi-million-dollar home and you got this greenhouse with a broken window in it, you know, we're in a weird place. I don't even think it needs to be. If it's an accessory building, it's allowed by the bylaw. That's all we need to. That's as far as we need to go.
Any further comment on the amendment? So I'm going to call the question of Councillor Ryan. Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so are you suggesting that it would still be allowed in the front yard?
Yeah, it's allowed anywhere. It's an accessory building. So why are we even drawing attention to it?
Yeah, all right, well, in that case, I also don't understand the point of making it.
Well, most greenhouses are not particularly nice, but we're making an issue of it. I say, well, it's an accessory building. We're allowing it in our front yard. That's what the zoning allows, that's what the bylaw allows. That's all we're asking to continue it. So we're making a direct or objective to put greenhouses in the front yard.
So Mr. Simon, you want to weigh in a little bit? Currently, it is not allowed in the zoning. Is that correct? And we are going to put it into the zoning to allow people to grow food in their front yard if they need to.
To your worship, through your worship to all of council, yes, that is correct. Current zoning regulations do not allow any type of accessory building to be located in the front yard. The only exemption for that currently exists in the zoning bylaw is if there are specific topographic constraints, then things like a carport can be constructed in the front yard or a garage that would be detached. But again, that's only in very specific, unique circumstances. The amendment that's included in this bylaw with respect to greenhouses is, again, trying to acknowledge the fact that looking at utilizing the lot for sun exposure. And again, just to clarify another item, regardless of the size, someone could have a 100 square foot building. It still needs to comply with the provisions of the zoning bylaw, regardless of whether or not a building permit is required. The regulations still are applicable to that development. So again, this was intended to provide flexibility for food producers so that they could take advantage of their lot in whatever that unique circumstance may be. And I believe it was Councillor Sherlett is correct. There is additional regulations when a greenhouse was intended to be located in the front yard. So respecting maximum size, setbacks, maximum height, that is currently included in proposed bylaw 2299.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Councillor Ryan, do you have further comment?
Yeah, what tools are available to the city to make more clear parameters around what is and isn't allowed for a greenhouse?
Mr. Simon, are there any additional tools?
Through your worship to Councillor Ryan, generally speaking, the zoning bylaw and having clear, concise regulations that are contained therein is intended to make the document accessible so that the public understands what the regulatory framework is for any development project that they're choosing to pursue. We encourage people to contact development services, and we can definitely work with our corporate services team if there's anything specific or unique to do social media blasts to inform the public of changing regulations, developing handouts and guides and pamphlets of the such, and that is something that the development services team will be looking into further in 2022.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is if somebody wanted to build a greenhouse that was less than 100 square feet in their front yard and it ended up being a disaster, like what is the recourse that a neighbor would have, if any?
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, that would be regulated, and I believe I'd defer to our corporate services, but I believe we have an unsightly premises bylaw that would ultimately apply if there's buildings that have become in a state of disrepair. Then there's the opportunity to enforce through that mechanism.
Bylaw will pay a visit.
But only if it's in a state of disrepair. So if it was just ugly, no.
Subjective.
Right, it's objective, yeah, fair enough, okay. Yeah.
It's just a vulnerability that you're pitting your neighbor. I mean, I guess if you live next to an ugly greenhouse, do you call bylaw and say, listen, you got a crappy looking, you're just pitting the neighbors against each other. And I'm saying, what are we needing to do this for? So again, it was also my misunderstanding. So there's no accessory buildings in the front yard.
Correct.
Yeah, so that was my misunderstanding.
All right, good. I'm not going to support the amendment. I think if there's going to be robust discussion, then we can bring it back and we can have that discussion. But right at the present time, with what Mr. Simon has stated, I'm okay with there's rules and regulations as to how you build a greenhouse. So,
are there rules and regulations?
Mr. Simon, there's some rules regarding greenhouses.
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott. So under the proposed regulations, if a greenhouse was to be located in the front yard, it may not exceed 20 square meters in size, so about 215 square feet. You're maximum permitted to have one greenhouse per lot within the front yard. May not exceed 20% of the front yard setback area. So if you think about the front yard area that's in front of a dwelling, kind of the overall area, it can't exceed 20% of it. Has to comply with a maximum lot coverage requirement for the applicable zone, must meet a setback of 2 meters from the front lot line, must meet the side yard setback requirements for principal buildings, may not exceed a height of 3 meters. And then they also need an application in accordance with our building bylaw. Those are the regulations that are proposed for greenhouses to be located in the front yard that they must abide by.
You need an application to put the greenhouse there.
Yep.
Sure.
All right.
Oh, yeah, that seems totally reasonable.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the amendment. If you vote in favor of this, then that's not allowing greenhouses in the front yard. Council Palmer, you have a comment before I call the question?
Yeah, just a question. So for clarity, for other accessory buildings under 100 square feet do not require a building permit. Would a greenhouse require a building permit under 100 square feet?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, no, a greenhouse is considered an accessory building in accordance with the building code. Any building under 10 square meters, so again, about 107 square feet, does not require a building permit. However, it's very important for the community to understand this as well. The regulations of the zoning bylaw still apply, even if no building permit is required. So if you were building a 10 square meter, so 107 square foot greenhouse in the front yard that did not require a building permit, it would still need to comply with the appropriate regulations in the zoning bylaw.
So, Mayor, to Councillor Ryan and other councillors, so a greenhouse, 100 square feet, 10 by 10, and 3 meters high. So what's that, 10 feet high, and 6.5 feet from the front property. So think of the neighborhood where there's an established neighborhood of residents. So now you have a building, actually it could be up to 250 square feet, 6 feet from the front property line. And I being on the cautious side, again, very supportive of urban gardening and farming and that kind of thing. However, I think we're probably going to regret this decision at some point, that neighbors are going to be upset about a building that's gone in the front that is changing the character of the neighborhood. But I'll leave it at that point and we'll go from there.
All right, any further comments? All those in favor? No,
The amendment, yeah.
of the amendment, yep. So Councillor Palmer, Councillor Elliott, those opposed? Balance of council, so the motion is defeated. Going back to the first motion, zoning bylaw number 2299 be read third time. Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, so I'd like to speak to the main motion then. So first of all, well done on the zoning bylaw. Thank you, staff, for all the work that went into that. $200,000 worth of work, I guess, plus staff time, I'm assuming. And we heard from the public hearing, there was just 2 people that spoke at that. I do believe that there was community fatigue on the number of things that we're doing, and there's some big changes with the carriage homes and the garden suites that will
also be changing the character of neighborhoods in residential areas. It's a big deal. The second speaker at the public hearing expressed concerns, of which I had expressed earlier, about the public engagement. And I don't believe that it was as robust as it should have been. However, I need to balance that with the changes in the decision-making that we've been entrusted from the electorate, and encouraging more affordable housing in the community was an election promise from myself, and that's going to be meeting some of those objectives. Again, similar to the greenhouses, but my argument's different now, is that I think there is going to be some people that are going to be very surprised when essentially a miniature home up to 1,000 square feet or so is going to be built in somebody's backyard adjacent to their yard. I think people are going to be surprised in our community, say, how did that ever happen? And yet there has been some public engagement. It's been in front of council many, many times. I think it is how we need to transition. It's getting that higher density in doing infill in a much better way. So I am excited and supportive of it. I would have liked more public engagement, but to slow that down at this point, I think we'll just get a bunch of controversy happening, and then we need to move ahead. So I will be supporting the motion as it goes.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Ryan, do you have a comment or question?
I have a question about how accessory buildings impact taxation.
Okay, Mr. Simon, any comment on that? How accessory buildings affect taxation? Any effect at all?
Through your worship, I would imagine that it impacts the assessed value of a property, which has an impact on taxation. But I would have to defer to the Director of Finance if I'm off base there.
Okay, Ms. McCabe, any comment?
I can speak to that.
Yeah,
because I think it's sort of general knowledge. So if you do a nice job and it increases the value of your property, then your taxes go up.
Yeah.
but not really for the city. It's all relative because it's all one collective pool, right?
For the individual taxation on that individual.
Sure, I'm thinking about from the city's perspective, like they're not going to be collecting additional tax.
Well, if your assessment goes up, then that's what's going to spur additional tax other than that.
But that's not, I'd love for Tanya to chime in because my understanding was that it was based on the city's needs and the budget, then it would get split up across all the properties.
Mr. Patrick.
If I may, through the chair, if the assessed value goes up and the mill rate goes up, then the tax will increase. But it's adjusted depending on what the mill rate is. And so the total assessed value based on, you're correct, what the city needs.
Yeah.
If the city says it needs $1 million, then that will be spread out over all the property classes across the organization to generate that $1 million. So yes, you're correct. But as far as the land economy is concerned, if I build a nice accessory building on my property, that will add to the value of my property. And could it increase my taxes? Only if my assessment and mill rate increase.
Right, but from the city standpoint, it's not as if doing this is going to add to our bottom line.
It can, because if the growth, if the across the board assessment growth is consistent and if the growth, if we get growth, that can help grow our tax base. So that's actually, it's not a bad thing necessarily.
Ms. McKay, you have your hand up. Do you want to make further comment?
Yes, Your Worship. If somebody's adding additional improvements to their land, it will result in an increase in their assessment value, which would come through in the year that the improvements are added as a non-market change. And then after that, it'll get built into the base. So there is a bump up.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Burksville, then Councillor Charlotte, then Councillor Palmer.
Further to Councillor Ryan's question, would these, like a carriage suite or a garden suite, I know with secondary suites, there's additional water and sewer fees, would those apply similarly to secondary suites as a carriage house? Or?
Ms. McCabe, any comment on that? If we're extending our water and sewer to a carriage suite, do we get extra cost? Do we get extra money for that?
As far as connection fees, yes. Whether DCCs would apply or not, I would need to defer to Mr. Simon.
Okay. Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, so that's one thing as part of the implementation of the zoning bylaw. We will need to have considerations for development cost charges because the way that the current DCC bylaw is structured, it is worded as secondary suites. We have done some research with other municipalities to determine how they charge for accessory dwelling units when they now have a detached unit on site. And it's pretty hit and miss whether or not they actually charge DCCs. So this will be part of an ongoing internal conversation about how we will administer the current DCC bylaw and whether or not amendments to that bylaw to clarify accessory dwelling unit compared to secondary suite need to be made, which would ultimately be brought back to council for consideration.
Does that answer your question, Councilor Brooksell?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
My question was actually not to do with DCCs, but with like utility fees on the tax bill.
So just to go back, Ms. McCabe, so if we're paying one residential fee, we're now adding a secondary residence to that property. Can we garner a secondary fee? And you're nodding your head yes.
Yes, through your worship. My apologies, I misunderstood the question. Yes, that is correct. We do charge utility fees to secondary suites as well, and we would be rewording the fees and charges bylaw to do that with carriage/garden units as well.
Good. All right. That makes me happy because on every different building I have downtown, even though it's one water line running in and goes to everybody, we all pay a separate fee. And so. Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you, Your Worship. It also opens the door for the DCC conversation to what Councillor Palmer was talking about, where when we're talking about infill and providing a little bit of leeway for DCCs to address that affordability piece. My comment and maybe a question should be a question. So regulatory process for engagement. As Councillor Palmer pointed out, a lot of the comments at the public hearing, a lot of the comments too, both of them touched on the process of engagement and citizen engagement. While I recognize we're dealing with a lot of big projects and big changes in our society and our planet that we do need to address, so yes, exhaustion and citizen fatigue is going to be part of that. I'm looking forward to a conversation around engagement and going beyond the regulatory process. This is something I've talked about in the past. I've often brought up collective impact as a tool to consider as we look at how do we engage citizens of all walks of life in these difficult conversations. I think with the technology, there's an opportunity to propose these ideas. There was, at one point, someone had brought up a conversation, the idea of that 3D model. From what I understand, there was something part of Luna, I believe, that had some to do with that visualization of our community and what it looks like and what it can look like. Because not everyone can read through these technical documents. Not everyone can understand some of the ideas being proposed and how it might affect their lives, especially when they're tired and stressed out and dealing with day-to-day life. But I think it's important that as we go forward into the next phases of the OCP and the zoning bylaws, that we do our very best to bring that vision to the community so that we can have that conversation in a functional way with all walks of life and all industry types, all citizen types. One of the things that makes Revelstoke special is that we are not just a tourist destination. We are not just vacation homes. We have industry here. We have families here. We have people living here for a wide variety of reasons. And I think that it is on us to make sure that those voices come to those tables in a way that helps guide our planning processes, not just at the end of the day part of the regulatory public hearing process, and not just casual conversation at the farmer's market or through surveys, that might reach a certain demographic, and some people will be more comfortable with that, but we miss the opportunity for a true visioning process that I know our contractors and our staff and our teams have done a really good job to try and address these. And I think we've learned a lot through this process, so that I would hope in the next stages of this that we can really dig into that and find a way to bring those voices to the table, so that at the next public hearing, our citizens are saying, wow, that was a great engagement. I do feel like all of our citizens were heard. Because it concerns me that this happened. I understand that the pandemic has been a huge problem to deal with, to try and have functional conversations when we're restricted to technology in a lot of ways. But I think we can use the opportunities that technology brings, while if it takes subsidizing to be able to have those conversations, then so be it. But let's look at what that looks like going forward. And I think as part of our budget conversations for next year and going forward, then that needs to be part of it. And I think it ties into communications on a broader spectrum. But this is what we see when we don't invest enough in communications and engagement.
Good comments, and I think what we need to do is we need to have this conversation. I would encourage you to have this conversation, Mr. Thacker and myself, and then we're actually going to have our contractors in on that conversation so they can hear from you and your suggestions.
Yeah, and I feel confident that that will go forward, so I'm fully supportive of this moving forward to the next stage, and I look forward to those discussions. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Proponent.
Good, thanks.
Okay. Any other comments on the motion on the table, reading it a third time? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's move on to item F. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me? Councillor Brooks Hill.
The Subdivision and Servicing Standard Amendment Bylaw number 2313 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. Any comments or questions for Mr. Simon? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item G, zoning amendment bylaw. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me? Councillor Elliott. Pardon me. Mr. Brookshill, I apologize. Go ahead, make your statement. Thank you.
Similar to the first item on the agenda, I'm going to recuse myself as my parents' property directly abuts the property.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that comment. Councillor Elliott, you read the motion, please.
Zoning amendment bylaw number 2314, zone 2021-006, be read a first and second time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. Any comments? This is basically a piece of property that is in the same area that we had the public hearing, and they are asking to basically subdivide. Is that correct, Mr. Simon? Any further comments on that?
Through your worship, yeah, the intent of the application is to rezone the subject property to residential 2 so that the proponent can do a subdivision to build another residence.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer, you have a comment?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So initially I was just going to be supportive of this, but as a result of the public hearing on Cedar Street, it seems to me that we really need to be looking at this whole area, what we really want, what the community wants for the whole area. I have some reluctance on the first and second reading. Definitely I will be opposed to waiving the public hearing. That's a separate motion, but I'll definitely be opposed to that. I think that would be a mistake based on what I heard from the public hearing today. So just speaking, to the comments that we're hearing, was that there's concerns, there's geotechnical concerns, there's infrastructure concerns on the street, there's concerns and changes of the character of Cedar as a whole, and there's So I think there's enough confusion there that we really need to pause and look at that as a holistic area. And then even doing this sort of ad hoc changes to zoning and even the OCP, I think is a mistake. I think we really need to look at the entire street and say, what is the vision for the community? And I realize that that's possibly slowing a little bit stuff up, but I just think we're rushing ahead based on that.
Thank you for your comments. Any further comments from council? Councillor Elliott?
So just like this entity here, it's comparable to both the units of the earlier discussion we had, or even bigger.
Yeah, bigger.
I think that it's zoned R2. Is that right?
Correct.
And he's just subdividing, doing exactly what the zoning would allow. The geotech and engineering has been engaged. The city engineering has approved the entire street for development and encouraged people to put the money. I mean, I think the developer who put the road in spent a fortune on the premise that he would be able to develop.
Right.
So I look at that and I say, well, we're in desperate need of housing. We're gonna get another house on the, whether it's, I'm sure the whole street needs to be, or the whole area needs to be considered, but it is central to downtown and it is prime for development. And this is not a major, this is it fits exactly with the zoning. So I have a tough time deferring it and putting it out to another lengthy evaluation process seems to be preposterous. It typifies everything we've done in the last number of years and we're trying to address.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anything further, Councillor Ryan?
I just couldn't agree more with all the things you just said.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Sherlock, any comment?
Thank you, Worship. I would agree with Councillor Elliott. I think I'm for once, right? I know we usually butt heads on things, but I agree. This is a huge lot. The lots that it's proposed to be subdivided, one is going to be 2 acres, the other is 1.5 acres. This is not over densifying this area. I think this is, like he says, exactly what we're looking for.
All right. So, Councillor Palmer, further comment?
Yeah. So. Don't misread what I'm saying because I'm in favor of higher densification. The neighborhood in general isn't in favor of that. This particular with the subdivision is much the same as this fourplex because once it's subdivided, you can build homes, and then with the new zoning bylaw, you'll be able to have carriage suites. So you'll be able to have a lot that's subdivided into 2. You'll suddenly have a density of 4 times what's there today. And just a clarification for Councillor Elliott that this zoning isn't in place. That's what we're addressing here right now. It's RR2, much like the other property. And so it is a change. In this case, there's not an OCP amendment, and I don't fully understand that, but anyway, to me, this is just as substantive as the one that we looked at. And I think that if we looked at that whole area and said, well, what really makes sense would include this ability, look at that other property that's the fourplex, there's a controversy with that. So, and again, we'll just stick with the first and second reading and see where it'll go to. Well, we'll see if it goes to a public hearing depending on the vote.
Okay, any further comments on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Palmer is opposed. Motion is carried. Someone want to put the second motion on? Councillor Sherlett.
The public hearing for bylaw number 2314 be waived in accordance with section 4642 of the Local Government Act. That notice be issued to waive the public hearing as per section 476 of the Local Government Act.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Elliott.
I think the biggest resistance for the proposal above was the scale of 5 units as opposed to 1 or 2, one additional. And I think what I gathered from the public hearing is that they were asking for a simpler or smaller version. They wouldn't have been any resistance. They had a duplex there. Right? That was their thinking. That was their comment that came out. Several people there. this is a duplex on a bigger lot. And I say, what are we pushing back against?
Good. Councillor Palmer?
At the public hearing, we heard from many people on Cedar Street very concerned about city communications. They weren't included in the 100-meter radius. Some weren't included in the 100-meter radius, and they found out later through the newspaper ads. And now and so they had the opportunity in the public hearing to come and appeal to council and express concerns. And this, by waiting, this is not about, this question that's on the table right now is not about the merits of the development. It's about the ability of the community to come and express concerns or support of the development. And I think it's an error for us to prohibit that ability, that public ability for the public to come and express concerns, especially when we've just heard it in this meeting, that they are disappointed that there hasn't been better information provided so that they could give information to people that were excluded. And now we're excluding everybody with this motion. I definitely will not support this motion.
Okay, I'm in favor of this motion because of what I heard in the public hearing. That, as Councillor Elliott has stated, they were looking for single or double on the property rather than a fourplex or a fiveplex, and they even stated themselves that some of them have a second building on their property or in favor of doing that. So I look at it and say I think we've heard what they said. Those who did speak and said they weren't notified because we notified everyone within a 100-meter radius, and they said because of their lots they weren't notified. Those were the people that were concerned, and so that I want to make clear. So I am in favor of this, and I'm going to ask, is there any more comments from council? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Palmer is opposed. Motion is carried. All right, we're going on to item H.
Councillor Brooks-Hill.
Yes, Councillor Brooks-Hill, please. Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Someone want to make the motion, please? Item number 1. Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, zoning amendment bylaw 2315 be read at first and second time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte, any discussion on the motion?
I'm not sure if there's a presentation or not, but this, I think it's fairly straightforward and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it is straightforward. It's just bringing that into the property, and I think it's straightforward. Any comment, Mr. Simon? I don't think any of us have a question. I think it's pretty straightforward, but I just want to know if you have any comment.
To your worship, I would defer to Ms. Hartling. This is her file, but I don't believe that we have any additional comments for this one.
All right. Ms. Hartling, any additional comment?
Yeah, no additional comments, just it's a rezoning for the subject property owner who owns both lots to extend their yard so that the shed's on their property.
Great, appreciate that. Any further comment from council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. And item, the second, number 1 about the public hearing. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Palmer.
So, Mayor Sulz, I'll make a motion that a public hearing for bylaw 2315 be scheduled as soon as possible.
Okay, is there a seconder for that motion? Seeing none, that motion dies. Someone else want to make another motion, please? Councillor Charlotte.
The public hearing for bylaw 2315 be waived in accordance with section 4642 of the Local Government Act, and that notice be issued to waive the public hearing as per section 467 of the Local Government Act.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Palmer.
So, Mayor Sulz, even though I think this is a relatively trivial, and I couldn't envision that anybody would have any objection to this particular zoning amendment, I am concerned about the degradation of democracy in the ability for public to publicly express concerns on this. if there is no issue with this, if there was no issue with this, waiving is, say, appropriate, by having a public hearing, nobody's going to show up. The mayor will open it. Nobody will say anything. It'll close and we'll pass the resolution for third reading, possibly at that same meeting. So there's no harm in having the public hearing. There is potential harm in shutting out the voices of the public by waiving public hearing that I think is appropriate in zoning. And I will make one other comment. I'm not sure if this is coming out of the legislation, but the provincial government is making it so that, that zoning requirements are, or the requirement for public hearing isn't even needed for zoning amendments. And I think that is is doing a disservice to our communities. So that's my point.
Thanks for your comments. So Councillor Charlotte and Councillor Ryan.
Just a question, Your Worship. What is the fee for a public hearing to the developer? I'm trying to find out the fees and charges.
Is there any fee, Ms. Hartling, to the developer for a public hearing?
Through your worship, it's just the original application fee at the start of the application that they pay. If there are additional staff time or additional public hearings, then there may be a fee of a result of that, but the standard application going through first, second, public hearing, and third reading, there's no additional fees to the application fee.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, to Councillor Palmer's point, I think that just going through the motions of the bureaucratic system just for the sake of it doesn't make sense in something like this, that it is so trivial that just going through the motions as opposed to using common sense is one of those things that causes delays. And if there's any opportunity where we can make a good decision to waive something, I think we should be taking it. So I think this is the perfect application.
All right, Councillor Palmer, you have a comment?
So just to dispute that position is there may be something that we're not aware of, and we're not going to hear that.
Thank you. All right, any further, Councillor?
So this application typically goes to the APC, and I think it's circulated through the neighborhood for comments prior to going through the development permit stage. Is that right?
Ms. Hartling, comment on that, please.
Yeah, through your worship, the application did go to the Advisory Planning Commission. However, a notice would not go out to neighboring property owners. The notice is in conjunction with the public hearing. So the landowner notification, just like a variance, goes out to the neighboring property owners if there is a public hearing.
But the landowner in this case, the adjacent property that's affected, they're one and the same.
Yes.
Yes, through your worship, that's correct.
Okay. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Palmer is opposed. Motion is carried. Let's move on to item 9I, fees and charges. Someone make that motion for me, please. Councillor Brooks-Hill.
That the fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2303 be read a first, second, and third time.
There's a second for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte, discussion on the motion. Councillor Charlotte, you have some notes?
Questions?
Yes.
I was curious on page 6, the development permit, there's changes to the wording, and I'm wondering about the definition of the difference between minor versus major development permits. I'm assuming that is outlined and detailed somewhere to make that really clear.
Okay, Ms. McCabe, any comments before we go to development services stuff?
No comment from me, Your Worship. I'll defer to Mr. Simon.
Okay, Mr. Simon, do you want to explain the difference between the two, please?
Through your worship, Councillor Charlotte. Again, the minor change in wording here is just to make it a bit more simple. Major development permit, minor development permit. It is the delegation bylaw that ultimately determines what constitutes a major and what constitutes a minor. And the delegation bylaw is currently set up so that Developments under $100,000 in construction value are considered minor development permits, and anything over $100,000 in construction value are considered major development permits. I will note for council that this is a bylaw that is on the development services team's radar to re-examine our delegation bylaw, and we are hoping at some point in 2022 that we will be able to work on this and bring it forward for council consideration.
Okay, other question?
That totally answers my question. Thank you very much. I appreciate that we define these things in one place rather than multiple places that then needs to get cleaned up later. So thank you.
Good. Councillor Palmer?
I do have-
Sorry, you have
sorry,
another question? No, go ahead.
I do have some other ones. So on page 13 in the RCMP, I was digging through these and I found a couple weird ones that I was just curious about. Photos on CD is an option. And I'm wondering if, the idea of getting something on CD, I know my father just recently got some medical records on CD and none of us had a way to play it.
So there might be a security issue with RCMP that they would want to put it on CD, but that is something that the RCMP designate.
Right.
And so I think if we're going to do that, there would be a fee. Ms. McCabe, I'm going to go to you just to clarify that, please.
Through your worship, yeah, it is just making the city bylaws consistent with the fees that they're charging on provincial files as well. So it is a provincial fee schedule. There is an opportunity, or it could be a potential for these fees to be needed for a municipal file. And so we decided to make them the same. So
Fair enough.
I would, yeah.
Nice to get them on USB sticks for security purposes. But
That may be what they do.
Well, that CD might be an old word, an old term, and they may be doing other things now. And usually the IT department and RCMP are pretty much on top of things, in what I've seen anyway. So I'm going to go to Councillor Palmer. You got one or two questions, and then I'll come back, Councillor Shalit. All right, Councillor Palmer.
So, Mayor Sulz, did this go through the Finance Committee?
You want to explain, it was discussed and then not brought up in Finance Committee, is that correct, Ms. McCabe? It was going to come directly to Council?
That is correct. It came directly to Council, Your Worship.
Sorry.
James said something.
I know, but you.
Oh, sorry.
Somebody speak.
I have more questions.
Okay, yeah, please.
Yeah. So in general, I think this is the kind of thing, because there's a lot of details in here. I've gone through, and many I agree with. Some I think have gone up too high. Many I think are still too low. But there's dozens and dozens of things here that's pretty operational. At the same time, it is fees and charges, and so there's significance behind it. I don't think that dialogue belongs here. I'm not going to go into it. Very tempted to, but I'm not going to. Much to your relief. There's a part of me that would really like to refer this back to the Finance Committee, because I think there's some some broader picture things, but I don't think we're ready to have that conversation right here. In the reports referring to housekeeping, some of this stuff is substantive and is certainly not what I would consider housekeeping. And for many people, I don't think it would be considered housekeeping. I think it's more than that. I'm appreciative that it's coming before next year and looking at these. I think the garbage and water and sewer should be a separate conversation again at the Finance Committee. So those are my comments.
Thank you. And Councillor Elliott?
So how would you rectify that? We take it out of the...
Well, we can readdress the fees and charges bylaw at any time. And maybe that's something for the future, and that might be a compromise on my part. So let's take a look at it. I do have concerns about the water and sewer without having a more specific, robust discussion.
So that's, Mr. Thackeray, that's where I'm going to get you to make comment.
So when there was a previous iteration in the city's financial plan, there is a recommendation over multiple years of increases for water and sewer. However, in discussion with both the city engineer and finance, I'm going to recommend through a corporate business plan a more fulsome discussion and some recommendations around those utilities, because the utilities are not fully self-funding. And there are I think there's some really good information that the engineer is going to bring to council. We're going to have some show and tell. We have some stuff to share, and we're looking forward to sharing it with you early in the new year. So we felt it'd be premature to put through numbers that we wanted to go back and look at more closely, and also provide some more full disclosure paper to council, so you have hopefully a good view of the full spectrum of issues that are facing our utilities as well as our regular financial situation, and recommend some policies and some procedures to take a really long horizon. So I think it will be helpful for council to look at all of that, because it will touch on a lot of different areas of finance.
You have a question, Councillor Chalette?
Just to follow up, I appreciate the comment, the explanation. That makes a lot of sense. I think fees and charges have come up at the end of each year of our term, starting with our first year, where we didn't really understand what was all encompassed by these fees and charges, because it's so big and it's so integral to what we do as part of our business plan. I look forward to that conversation, and I would just suggest that whatever recommendations and conversation we have coming out of that gets rolled into the training for the next council, so that when they come in, that they have an understanding of our fees and charges and what we've learned and suggest going forward.
Right, makes total sense. Any further comments, Councillor Elliott?
On the utilities, I think that's, we should get to that as soon as we can. But adding waste to the discussion, not just the utilities, how do we green our community? Yeah. And there's going to be cost to it. So let's as a collectively, we should be absorbing it. It shouldn't be part of our tax consideration. This is part of moving towards the future. And
I would,
go ahead.
I would absolutely recommend council look at those, because I would look at the garbage and waste and recycling as a utility function, and I think we should look at it in its totality. So,
and then so those are things we're going to look at. We're going to look at cemetery costs, our actual costs, that sort of thing, and have some justification for increases there. So those are things that fortunately Ms. McCabe and Mr. Thackeray have been working on, and basically saying these are some areas that we need to adjust in. Councillor Elliott, and then I'll go to Councillor Conlon.
Just on the development permit fee, or defining, whether it's $100,000, it's a minor, or well, that's a major. $100,000 was no very far to pay, and to me, if we're getting so wound up on $100,000, that buys you a greenhouse. So I wonder. Wheels with I'm wondering, is that based on reality? Because the construction costs and everything, engineering cost alone would absorb that $100,000. So I don't know if that needs to be reconsidered. What the boundary between a minor and a major DP might be.
Any comment on that, Mr. Simon, at this point?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, noted. Thank you for the feedback, and as stated before, this is definitely something that is on staff's radar, and we will be looking into it in 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Thackeray.
And just to follow up on that comment, as council's aware, we're doing a deep process review of planning and development, and so that will get captured in that review. Great. It will be addressed.
Councillor Conlon.
So Mayor Sulz, Council, I'm supportive of most of the changes in the fees and charges, and I have looked at basically at every one of them. I've got notes here. The The exception, though, without having a more robust discussion, is the increase in water and sewer rates. It looks like this bylaw we're increasing, well, I guess that's, what is the percentage? Does council know what the percentage of our increasing water and sewer rates?
Is it 5%, Ms. McCabe, or less?
Just through the chair.
Yes, go
We're
ahead.
not recommending any changes in water and sewer general other than Big Eddy, which is a separate utility.
Is that correct? It's just Big Eddy.
Yeah, so and then we're going to look at the overall stuff after.
Yeah, I'm not recommending any increase to water and sewer at this time, other than Big Eddy, which is a separate system.
It's 3% if you're getting.
Page 2, Schedule G.
So that on the track changes, I'm looking at the track changes right now. It appears to me that there is increases. So this would be Director of Finance. Water rates. So for example, on page, there's no pages. On the track changes document, page 26 of.
Yeah, that's pretty, Ms. McCabe.
51, for example. It shows water rates excluding the Big Eddy. So looking, and it looks like there's somewhere, page 24 of 51 on the track changes, schedule G1, water rates excluding the Big Eddy. It looks like it's about a 5% increase there. And that's my point, is I don't see this as housekeeping. I see this as substantive changes.
Yeah,
Mr. Gates.
Through your worship, I'm not sure what's happened with the bylaw that's in front of council, but there's no proposed increases to the water or sewer rates. So there was at one point some proposed increases that were consistent with what was within the long-term financial plan, but those were removed at this time so that we can have the other discussion with council in the new year. So that should not be included in there with the fee increases.
All right, thank you.
So, I clicked on the link from the report on the track changes. That's the link that was in the report.
Right.
So that link, attachments links to the report number 9I. There's the fees and charges bylaw, which has the figures without track changes. That does not reflect the changes that are in the track changes document.
Through your worship, those should not be included in there. My apologies. The bylaw was not updated. I'd have to refer to or defer to administration. They prepare the bylaws, but there may have been some miscommunication there. But the track changes that are showing for the water and the sewer funds should not be in there. They should, and the final one shouldn't show those amounts either. You're correct. They do reflect what's showing on the track changes, but those are not what's being proposed. So there's no changes proposed to those schedules. So they would still stay at the existing rates for water and sewer at this time.
Any further comment, Councillor Palmer, regarding that?
Just have a minute.
Yes.
And so on page, in the agenda, page 598, schedule G1, the track changes, it's not, so in there it's, so for example, number 1, private dwelling per unit of $42.92. In the track changes document, it shows $40.83. So has that increased, or has it not?
So your worship, you're looking at the water rates or the sewer rates?
This is water rates excluding Big Eddy, schedule G1 on page.
So I'm just going to the link.
So what was the rate in 2021 for private dwelling?
It was 406, oh, that's Big Eddie, my apologies. It was $490 a year was private dwelling, and it's staying at that at this point until the rates are reviewed in January.
So
it'd be the
that's,
full-
yeah, so there's a problem there. I think we're gonna have to table this. There's an error. I'm not gonna be able to fix it here tonight.
So in theory, there's supposed to be no change for water and sewer for this year.
Sir, just to.
Go ahead.
Through the chair.
Go ahead, I'm just trying to find where to talk.
Just a question through to Councillor Palmer. Which version of this bylaw are you looking at? You're looking at the one that's printed or the one that's, you said it's?
I'm looking at both right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so the printed one.
Yeah.
So on the printed, which is the agenda, I think it's on it's page 598 of 633. And so I'm just using one as an example because there's dozens of them. Private dwelling unit per unit, it's showing $515 annual. The old was $490, and that's just what the Director of Finance said.
Yeah,
so what's in front of us does not reflect what I'm understanding of staff intention. And that is substantive enough that we can't fix that right here.
Cannot.
So I'm going to put a tabling motion that this be referred back to staff.
May I, sorry.
So Mr. Thackeray, make a comment, then I'll go to Councillor.
Yeah, if this item isn't ready, so I would like to ask council to support that.
Okay.
Send it back to staff.
You have a brief comment, because he's asking to table.
Yeah, so the intent is that it's 0% of this.
That's correct.
The only increase that's intended is 3% for the Big Ed.
Yep.
Why 3% for the Big Ed?
Any comment on that, Ms. McCabe?
Through your worship, just to continue to build up their reserves, which are at this point quite small because it's only been in existence for a few years, so that when the time comes to do a major upgrade or replacement of that system, that the money is available, unlike the last time where they had to borrow and rely on government grants to pay for it.
Just on the Big Eddy for the last 3 years of our term, we've been increasing it 5 and 10% each year. This year it's 3.
I do not know what the historical increases have been for the Big Eddy. I'm not sure they've been that high, but there have been increases every year. Yes. And some of it's to reflect operating increases as well, but mostly it's for reserves.
Okay. So Mayor Sulz, I'm going to withdraw my tabling motion. It hasn't been seconded, just so we can have a bit more conversation. If I may, this is just a procedural thing. I would actually prefer this to have a special finance committee meeting to talk about this, because there's enough stuff in here that I think we really should have that dialogue. It's just a possibility. I can just leave it with the tabling thing and then put that back on and just leave with that. Okay, we got a great CAO. I'll put my tabling motion back on.
All right, I need a second.
It's non-debatable.
Councillor Elliott.
Non-debatable, right? Non-debatable.
Non-debatable. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, so we're going to table that. Go back to staff. Thank you. All right, we're going on to staff reports. 11A. So the motion on the table is the retirement, and then we will move on to reappointing. So as you will note, I'll just make a note before we make this motion. Basically, Mr. Blake was on the previous rendition. Mr. Blake is retired from the board during this past year, and we didn't get that information to administration. So that's been amended. So I'm going to ask someone to make this motion for me, please. Councillor Charlotte.
The council approves the effective on the retirement of the following directors of the 2021 annual general meeting of the Revelstoke Community Forest Corporation, RCSC Holding Company Limited. Excuse me, Gary Sulz, Jim Blake, Long Parker, Bill Beard, Rob Elliott, Jackie Ryan, Nicole Charlotte. The city hereby appoints the following individuals as directors of the company to the term to expire the next annual general meeting of the company or until their successors are elected or appointed, subject to provisions of the articles of the company. Barry Sulz, Lenny Parker, Bill Beard, Rob Elliott, Jackie Ryan, Nicole Charlotte, and Tanya McKay.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none?
Comments, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I'm a little bit frustrated with myself because I just seem to be the negative voice here, and that's not my intention in stretch of imagination. I'll just make a couple of comments. I'm concerned about RCFC and at least from my perspective, the lack of communication coming back to council updates or reports. That I think there's some governance problems with this motion. It should really be done at the annual shareholder meeting that's under the Corporations Act. I'm concerned about just the direct appointment. There's a comparison with the remuneration. I think we should have just appointed 3 sound people and had that remuneration thing done right away. Here, where there's substantive, ongoing decision-making and responsibility of the directors, or the directors, we're doing this without any real process at all of selection. So those are my concerns. I'm not expecting anything more to happen from that, but I hope it's on the public record.
All right, thank you. Definitely this was discussed at the annual board meeting.
Just for clarification, Mayor Sulz, on maybe we'll have a discussion later on, but I think that the annual general meeting of the shareholder under the Corporations Act, that is to be, that's where these decisions are made by the shareholders, which is the corporation of the city of Revelstoke, of which we are the representatives. There's one shareholder. This is not the right place to do it from governance. Probably picking on little details, but it is a thing. And then,
you could have joined the AGM.
Sorry?
You could have joined the AGM.
Sorry.
Our AGM,
Yeah.
the RCFC one, you could have joined that, like it's public.
The AGM is of the shareholders. That was not a properly called AGM. Anyway, I'll just leave it.
Okay, thank you. I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Did you make note of my objection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Just as that entity is basically it's a business owned by the community, and we're making decisions, business decisions, so it's different than council decisions. So just generally, we're making the soundest business, well-directed actions. You have to be in that frame rather than just city councilors. And if we're going to recruit new people into it, you might bring in some skill sets that fit, or to bring it to the next level, and that should be the thinking.
That's exactly it. And so, we are looking for another forester as well to complement this group.
Yeah, and things in the forestry are dicey right now, to say the least. So it's from the environmental world, different things are changing, and just something to be wary of.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go on to item number B, staff report, and this is RCEC. Someone want to make this motion for me, please? Councillor Charlotte.
The council approved that effective on the retirement of the following directors, the 2021 annual general meeting of the Revelstoke Community Energy Corporation, Tanya McCabe, Chantal Wilson, Bart Larson, James N. McMahon, Gary Sulz, Cody Yunker, and Michael Brooks Hill. The city hereby appoints the following individuals as directors of the company for a term to expire at the next annual general meeting of the company or until their successors are elected or appointed, subject to the provisions of the articles of the company. Tanya McCabe, Chantal Wilson, Bart Larson, James McMahon, Gary Sulz, Cody Yunker, Michael Brooks Hill.
Okay, second for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott, discussion on the motion.
Mayor Sulz, so just further, same comments on the understanding on the shareholder, which we represent, the annual general meeting. I'm not sure if I was ever informed of these annual general meetings. And then one other point that, well, there's two other points that I think warrant some discussion by the shareholder, which council represents, is the role and responsibility of appointing council members on the board of directors. There's been some interpretation in the past of corporations, fully owned corporations by the municipality. It may not be arm's length. That's further to what Councillor Elliott was talking about. The arm's length responsibility isn't necessarily arm's length, and there's a majority of council on it. And the second thing that in general, there's exceptions, but in general, philosophically, I'm opposed to appointing staff, paid staff, to decision-making roles. I think that they can be there in supportive roles, but in general, am not supportive of staff being appointed in the decision-making roles.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Palmer is opposed. Motion's carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 11C, Development Services, liquor license application for the River City Pub. This is basically an enlargement of the deck. So someone want to make the motion for me, please? Put it on the table. Councillor Palmer.
So I can do something positive. The council endorsed staff's comments based on the regulatory criteria of the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, LCRE, for liquor primary structural change to the existing liquor license, and that the feedback from residents, if any, solicited by notification letters mailed to property owners within 100 meters of the subject property be provided to LCRE, and that council recommend their approval of the liquor primary structural change for the following reasons. The location of the proposed structural change is consistent with the official community plan and is permitted in use in the central business district C1 zone. No significant negative impacts on the overall community are anticipated as a result of the proposed structural changes, and that the planner's report dated December 7, 2021 be provided to the LCRB as background.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Palmer.
Just further to my long-winded motion, sometimes in the past they actually required that to be read out. That's why I read it out in its entirety.
Yep, appreciate it. Thank you. Any further discussion? You have a comment?
Well, if it's a requirement, then we should think about condensing and concise language on our motions.
So they dictated.
Yeah, I say, well, we should make it a purpose to parse down these long-winded motions to very simple terms.
Well, you'll have to talk to the province because they dictate.
Oh, no, I'm talking about us, whoever's proposing the motion.
Right. All right, turns to be good enough. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon, Ms. Hartling. Appreciate your work today. So I'm just going to go on to communications. Heritage Advisory Commission meeting minutes of November 8th. Any comments from council? Councillor Palmer.
Just further to Councillor Elliott's comments at the beginning of the meeting regarding committees. This is commission, of course, but commissions and committees really encouraging concise recommendations coming from that to council, and further to that immediately as per our procedure bylaw, that those recommendations be formed on part of our the agenda package.
Okay, appreciate that. Any further comments on these minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to Development Advisory Planning Commission meeting minutes of November 1st.
This is just a confirmation of the article that came up earlier in our agenda on Cedar Street.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So I think in general, as a representative, that they were in favor or pro it.
That's correct. Yeah. All right. Seeing no comments, Ms. Rousseau, Ms. Floyd, any comments or questions from the press?
Your worship, no comments.
Yep. So on and off at the same time. I guess there's nothing. Thank you, ladies. Appreciate that. All right. I'm going to ask for a motion to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1E of the community charter. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Shalet, Councillor Brooks Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. I'm going to go in camera. Thank you, staff. Appreciate all your work.